Hi, my name's Bob Greenyer and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome to this stream, I think it's 5th of June 2022, and you're probably wondering why has he got the glasses on. Well, I had the pleasure of taking my son to see the Top Gun movie on Friday, so it's a highway to the danger zone. If you haven't seen it, I'm not paid to do this, but you have to go and see it. It's a good bit of America, that you can all enjoy. Anyway, I don't have aviators, but I have these glasses, and they're as near as, damn it, to the kind of glasses that I will be talking about when I say glasses, visual thing that I will be talking about later in today's presentation. And what we've got here is what I would say are two glasses, and I don't want to go forward. And this is our, how should we say, Eye of Horus, Eye of Ra, and our mirrored structure here. And this was a super bonus that we got from the trip that I took, which I'll talk about later in this presentation. So let's have a sound check. Did anyone hear what I was blathering on about there? Did you hear what I was saying? Hi Rhett, hi Corky, hi Artifact, hi Space Case, hi Daniel Foster. I hope Space Case you're feeling better. Hi Gordon Doherty, hi Corky, hi Drav, hi Cosmic Dave, great to have you in the house, and Daniel Foster too. Hi Stephen Behalls, fantastic to have you also. Hi John Watson, hi everyone who's managed to make it here. D2105K, excellent. Gordon gives the all clear on the sound. Okay, it's a slightly different format. We're going to talk about the up-and-coming ICCF 24, rather. These are the topics for today, ICCF 24, and then I will talk about a possible explanation for eruptions in coherent matter transmutations, and I will give my hypothesis for a rationale for that, and it's also related to why you don't see any typical particle emissions, in my view, from the coherent matter transmutation process, LENR, cold fusion, whatever, and gamma rays, all of these things that we're told to look out for if we're going to be creating fusion, but that isn't, it would seem, what's going on. Then I'm going to talk about Bagel experiments, and this isn't necessarily Bagel experiments that have been done. I think we should really give a separate forum for that to the fantastic experimenters out there that are giving this a shot, although I will refer to something that's just come in from Henk Uren, and what I'm going to be talking about here is things that I would like to see maybe explored with bagels or multiple bagels when we get to a position of having those. And based off what we potentially learned is the structure of these clusters of the closed pointing vectors. And I'm going to give an example of what I think is a kind of minimum structure, and then ask people to consider what can be done with that. And then I'm going to give some findings from my trip to the LABO, which is Lab Tech show in the exhibition grounds in Prague. I went up there for just 1 and a bit hours access to the SEM because it happened to be at this show, and I don't know whether they're going to bill me for that, but it was worth getting up there because it said you can have a free access, and so I thought I'd go up and use the same SEM I've been using these last couple of months and see if I can have a look for any finer detail on the structure we saw at the end of the last week's presentation, and I will tell you about what I found and what else I found, and I think it's going to be very interesting. Okay, so, and Hank's here as well, excellent, and David Cooper, FPV Angel, we have a good quorum, this is really good news. Okay, so first up is ICCF 24, and it's going to be held in the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley, California, USA. And this is a, if I get my mugshot out of the way, you can see that. And this is obviously the place that a lot of innovation has occurred in terms of computer technology over the past several decades and in terms of software. And it would be a fantastic place with the type of people that are around that valley for maybe interacting and trying to get a bigger profile for this field. And to that end, I have to thank Carl Page for taking on the burden, because it is quite a challenge, and for doing it with such excellence for this year's ICCF. And so thank you to Carl Page for that. And this is literally right next door to the sort of Menlo Park Google campus and many of the other services that we have found ourselves using in almost ubiquitously all over the world in the last couple of decades, and certainly in the last decade to a huge degree. Okay, so I will talk about the presentations here. So we're going to go and get a link for that. So if you just bear with me, I will get the presentations that are up, and I'll tell you what I think of those. And so give me just a second. Okay, so here we go, and the first up here is Mike McCubry. He gets top billing, as is often the case, and he is talking about transition to technical sessions. So I guess this is an introduction here, and actually this is technical sessions. I don't know whether this is the presentation synopsis, so just let me try and dig that out, if that's any different. Anything different? I think that might be. I don't know. Let me just check that before I say something I shouldn't have. Sorry for this short delay in proceedings. Okay, it is. I'm talking about the right thing. So this is day 2, day 3. Okay, right. I just didn't want to tell you something that wasn't factual. Okay, so basically we're going to start on lunchtime on day 2. So I guess it's all registration on July the 25th and other things. So we've got Yasuhiro Iwamura, and this is the group in Japan that are, I think they're working out of Sendai and Tohoku, maybe. And he's going to be talking about anomalous heat bursts triggered by input power perturbations observed in nickel-based nanostructured thin films with hydrogen. And the structures he has ended up by producing look very much like those that were talked about as being very good for hydrogen occlusion, and they've used the same phrase in their work way back in, I think it was 1870s or something. Thomas Graham FRS, I think it was. I might have got that wrong, but you can go and have a look at my presentation on that a long time ago. And it's basically a sphere on the end of a kind of a pedestal, almost exactly like the structure that we observed right at the end of, or near the end of the session that where we were looking at the Henk Uren's copper pipe. And so they produce this nanostructured surface on there, and this occludes the hydrogen, and they are saying they create very heavy electrons, and that these end up by doing the transmutation process, and that is their IP. However, I would suggest it's probably the same thing. In fact, I think all of these things are the same thing, and that is my view. Anyway, so we have Masahiko Hasagawa, metal hydrogen electron, I guess, reactions in new experiments by D system. So maybe this is maybe this is a deuterium system. I don't know. Obviously, we know very well Francesco Celani progress, I guess that should be, on confirming simple procedures to produce anomalous heat effect and investigate their origin by thin, constant wires under H2 and D2 gases at high temperatures. And so, obviously, we were the first people to replicate this fantastic scientist. And if it wasn't, must remind everyone, if it wasn't for Francesco Celani, the MFMP would basically have not got started. So thank you to Francesco, and it's great to see him on the first sessions, on the technical sessions. And then Dimitar Alexandrov, I didn't really know about him. He works out of Canada. He is obviously, it would seem here, cold nuclear fusion reactions in constant and successful experiments. This looks like a potential replication. I don't know if it's their successful experiments. Obviously, maybe he included our experiments in his review, or it's just their own work. But anyway, I met this guy for the first time at the airport in Rome because he was talking to Francesco Celani when I left Assisi that last time I was in Italy. And so that's Dimitar Alexandrov, so I'll be very interested to see what he has to say. And then Jean-Paul Barbarian, for those that don't know, he is the incredible editor of the Condensed Matter Nuclear Science journal that typically produces one large tome every year. And this is a collection of papers presented, for instance, at the CMNS forums and other forums throughout the year. And he's done a gargantuan amount of work for that. Now, he's talking about excess heat in nanoparticles of nickel alloys in hydrogen. And we handed him some years back, I think after Padua, some nanometric structured PNK Russian nickel, and he didn't actually get anything out of that sample from Alexander Parkhomov. But interesting it's to see whether he's actually using nanoparticles or nanoparticles on in a similar way to what the Japanese are doing here, whether they're actually producing nanoparticles and working with that. Of course, Jean-Paul has done many experiments over many years. I do worry that if they're using nanoparticles of nickel and its alloys, and obviously constantan is an alloy of nickel, that he might be exposing himself to strange radiation, but I'm sure he's very well aware of that. I hope so, anyway. Edward Bating, I can't remember, but maybe he's part of the NASA group. Don't want to speak out of turn, but he's doing a search for excess heat replication studies. So is it their replication studies? I think I'm going to be very interested in this talk to see if they've done any attempted replications. And in our experience, replications, someone always thinks they can improve things. We made the same mistake when we tried Francesco Celani. However, we failed because we tried to improve. In fact, the improvement was what Francesco suggested he was going to do next, so we just wanted to leapfrog him, and that was our error because we swapped out the borosilicate glass with fused quartz, and it did not work, and that showed the importance of potentially the lithium carbonate or the boron that's in the borosilicate glass. And later I found out the importance of both lithium and boron, and you can see that most recently in the light bulb experiments of Dr. Parkhomov, where he is using a overdriven tungsten filament light bulb, and he is observing high excess in low weight secondary target materials for what he is referring to as relic neutrino fluxes, and that is highest with things like a boron and lithium. So it would be interesting to see what he's doing there. Mitchell Swartz, you don't hear much about him throughout the year, and sometimes that's a good thing. Probably some people you hear too much of. Anyway, Mitchell Swartz, when he presents always something very interesting. And so I'll be interested to see what this synchronization of a vacancy-loaded deuterons enables successful Lana mass energy transfer. So it's always something interesting that he has to say. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm very pleased to see Anatoly Klimov here as someone that is very well aware of Ken Shoulders, and he's one of the leading Russian researchers. Obviously, you've seen him in some of the rebroadcasted weekly meetings. He actually organizes those meetings along with his colleague, Zatalepin. And so I'll be interested to see what he's saying here. Water plasma vortex reactor and obtaining of extra thermal energy and transmuted chemical elements. Now, we will have seen a fair chunk of these presentation or the presentation content here, but it's good that he's getting a forum. I don't think he will be traveling out of Russia. I think this will be a remote presentation, and that is sad and unfortunate. I do hope that he could travel. I don't know what the situation would be, but I know that Yuri Bajatov was prevented before he died to travel to the last time that or one of the times when I was in America, and that was at ICCF 18. So he was turned away at the border. And so I hope that Anatoly, if he is going, it doesn't have any problems there. C. Chen is a name that I've not heard of before. Excess heat in D2H2 nickel palladium reaction system with multiple oxidation of nickel palladium alloy powder. And so obviously you've got paramagnetic and nickel here. And so maybe he presented at ICCF 23, and this is an expansion of his work here. I'm sorry if I hadn't read that before. Obviously, the legend Peter Hegelstein from MIT, and models for accelerated nuclear de-excitation, Dike enhanced excitation transfer on the 14.4 kiloelectron volt transition in iron 57. And so obviously iron 57 is this material that was shown by Oretskev to aggregate the magnetic pseudo-monopoles that are produced in all of the work that we have been looking at over the several couple of years. But Peter Hegelstein is often talking about down conversion of high energy photons to low energy photons. So for instance, from gamma rays to thermal photons, and this might be an extension of that work. So for those that haven't been following Peter's work, it is quite theoretical. He's got lots of theoretical, but it's good that we have someone of his caliber looking at these theoretical aspects of this field. Akito Takahashi, he's a fantastic, great guy. Always good to see. Understanding that the metal hydrogen electrical power generation patterns and I've talked about TSC theory, and it actually is quite interesting where you get these cubic crystals of material, and you get the deuterons forming on the boundaries, and then they come together in this sort of tetrahedral condensate, and this leads to the fusion, and that is his theory. Vladimir Vysotsky, he is again from Ukraine, from Kiev. He teaches at the university in Kiev. I would be very happy to see him travel to America and give his presentation in person. He tends to do that, and I don't think he will have the restriction that is imposed on the Russian community. But anyway, self-similar mechanism of repeatedly flashing Lena in magnetized, partially ionized gas, warm plasma. This is very, very interesting to me. I actually might reach out to him and see what is he talking about here. Self-similar. Well, I love this term here. And this is a mechanism. This is a self-similar mechanism. I like this. Repeatedly flashing Lena. Well, with Henk Urens and the work of David Buttilia, we've seen repeatedly flashing Lena. So is this something similar to what we've been seeing in Vega? Because we've had partially ionized gas in our Vega experiments, and whether it's magnetized, there's definitely magnetic fields in there. And I wouldn't call the plasma... Anyway, the point is that I'm very interested. Vladimir Vysotsky is very, very prolific in this field, and I encourage anyone to go and look at his work on biological transmutations done with Adakorninova. I've talked about it in the past. I think it's called Scooby-Doo or something like that, where he's taking methogenic sea ooze, which is this various type of bacteria that is able to survive in unpleasant salty conditions, and other types of bacteria, and he's mixing that with yeast, even brewer's yeast type yeast, and he's putting that into a sort of growing medium with glucose and getting transmutations. And the first one I think he was manganese 55 to iron 57, another one was cesium 137 to barium 138. And so he showed a transmutation both producing this iron 57 rare NMR isotope of iron from manganese 55, and also the radiation remediation of cesium-137 using biological materials in his so-called syntrophic colony with Adakorninova. Okay, so George Miley, fantastic to see him. these are definitely what they self-identify, or people identify as, the old guard of Lena, and long may he live. Advances in understanding cluster-type reaction sites. Cluster-type reaction sites. What is this? What is this? Well, I believe that I might be wrong in saying this, but I think he's been working with. No, I don't want to say something that's not correct. But anyway, I do think I'm interested to see what this presentation comes with. Lawrence Forsley obviously worked with SPAWA, and then he has a bit of story about how that was disbanded. But he's talking about electron-screened and enhanced nuclear reactions. Now, Lawrence Forsley is kind of... I understand, and again, I'm not sure about this, but if I'm incorrect, I'm sorry. But I think he has been a guiding force to drive what the funding is spent on in at least one part of the funded work in Europe under the Horizon 2020 project. That is my understanding. I may be wrong. If I am wrong, I'm sorry. But anyway, this electron screen thing, there is a lot of work going on with the group out of Poland that are looking at different electron screening processes. Of course, when we're talking about the exotic vacuum objects, the flux. I've given a presentation where I think it was Savatomova was talking about how the structure of the kind of itonic cluster or similar things in ball lightning or exotic vacuum objects leads to essentially total screening of material. And so I kind of lament that there is not a better engagement with all of the work of Takaaki Matsumoto and Ken Shoulders by Lawrence Forsley. And actually, the SPAWA group was specifically criticized in the 2010 interview with John Hutchison. And I actually approached Lawrence Forsley at Boulder, Colorado, and tried to open a conversation with him about this, but I kind of got stonewalled, and it's a shame because he's a fantastic, fun guy to be with. The project has always had a good relationship with him. He helped secure equipment for my colleague down in France early on, Mathieu Vallat, and actually Mathieu Vallat is preparing metals for the Polish group as part of the Horizon 2020 team for this electron screening process. You can see a 1, 2, 3 process where this thing is coming together in a kind of sequence of events. So I wish he would debate me on their work. And of course, he's one of the leading people at NASA, and they believe that they are getting this lattice, a kind of assisted process where they are firing a gamma, effectively created something like a synchrotron, goes into a conversion target, produces a gamma ray. The gamma ray goes in, and they're saying that is a photonic process. However, we know 100% from the work of Bogdanovich et al. At the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute that when you do exactly this, you create these pseudomagnetic monopoles, and the pseudomagnetic monopoles have shown to do transmutation. And moreover, the element that they're using, which is a lanthanide, is one of the most magnetic lanthanide nuclei, and it would aggregate these magnetic monopoles. And so I don't believe that NASA's work is observing real neutrons. They don't have, in my view, in the papers that I've seen in Nature, the correct technology to be able to discriminate between the pseudoneutrons, and there's been recent work from the Russian community on evaluating how this causes problems, and also it was mentioned in 1995 by Takaaki Matsumoto, and we've observed these spurious signals coming out, and they typically used scintillators, and as I have discussed with the 2013, I think it was, patent by Alexander Shishkin, the NP sort of photonic areas in scintillators get confused by these clusters, and they occupy these sites, giving spurious results, and also the electronics, anything that's got an NP junction in it, will be affected by this as well. And so it's concerning that this seems to be overlooked, but they've got a lot of IP to protect, and they've gone down a road, and Ken Shoulders said this, they can't go back because they've got to progress in their publication. So I wish and appeal to Lawrence Forsley to actually engage with the other arguments that would explain the technology that is being promoted in by NASA and in journals like Nature. Okay, I think it's Nature. Anyway, Graham Hubler, microscopic insights into the anomalous heat effect that unify disparate experimental results. Microscopic insights. This is fantastic. I really hope he's starting to look at what physically is going on. However, Graham Hubler was the head of, I think, the Naval Research Labs research. I think in 2000, I think it was in 2000 when the Abrahamson-Dennis model of ball lightning came out of Israel. He was asked for comment by the BBC, out of all people on planet Earth, what he thought about this new model of ball lightning, and he says, well, of course, the US Navy has been very interested in ball lightning for a very long time. This is in 2000, and this explains some of the phenomena, but not all of the phenomena, and it's one to keep an eye on, and so forth. And then Graham Hubler then went to, as I understand it, manage the Sidney Kimmel Institute of Nuclear Renaissance, which was a 5-year funded program at the University of Missouri. And he was basically overseeing that, and it was supposed to generate science that was then put into the open space. And in fact, the Sidney Kimmel Institute of Nuclear Renaissance did try and replicate, or attempt to replicate, our GS 5.2 experiment, and they basically changed every parameter, and so they didn't replicate it. They didn't even come close to replicating it, and they didn't even instrument it until they saw excess heat. But that wasn't the point. That isn't what we said we saw, which is of interest. We saw what I now would assume is an exotic vacuum object blowing up and producing a EMP and related various energy clusters and confusing of equipment and shutting down of equipment and saturating of our spectrometer, and all kinds of things went on in that thing which we called signal back then. But more worryingly, Graham Hubler, in my view, and I will say it, and I've said this before, so it's not a new thing, he specifically had a presentation at ICCF 23 in China, and it was referring to exotic vacuum objects, and he says they are just Coulombic explosions. And in my view, that is essentially a limited hangout. Basically, he was, yes, they can be Coulombic explosions. And when you have a Coulombic explosion, it's when the entire matter has got to a point where it can't withstand the repulsive pressure of the Coulombic pressure of the electrons that are forced into a volume, and it explodes. But this is exactly the process that was defined, I think, in the 1960s and 70s by the Russian, and I'm going to forget his name. Oh God, oh dear, I'm going to forget his name. And it basically the theory of ectons. And ectons are effectively exotic vacuum objects, and so it's kind of like, I don't know whether he really knew what he was saying, but I really seriously expect he did, because it is the process of producing microball lightning, and he is saying it's just Coulombic explosions, and there's nothing really interesting to look at here. Please move along. And so I'm disappointed. I would also like to debate Graham Hubler, former Navy lab researcher lead and former lead of the Missouri's Sidney Kimmel Institute of Nuclear Renaissance. So I would like to debate Lawrence Forsley. I would like to debate Graham Hubler on the subjects for which their entire understanding is based. Please. I would like to have an open debate on these subjects. Okay, so Anthony Zapero, but I am excited to see what this microscopic insights here. I would be very, very disappointed, very, very disappointed to find out that he was going and looking specifically at things and trying to explain them away as normal things which you don't need to look at, so please don't look at it. Definitely don't look at it. Definitely do not look at it, because you're not going to learn anything by using your microscope and looking at things closely. I genuinely hope that this isn't what this presentation is. So microscopic insights into the anomalous heat effect that unify disparate experimental results. I would argue that using a microscope and paying attention, you can unify disparate experimental results. I would say that is possible. I don't know this next guy. Maybe I should. Anthony Zapero, electron quasiparticle catalytic binding. Electron quasiparticle catalytic binding in chemical reactions with a proposed nuclear analogy. Well, there is quasiparticles of electrons that bind and produce a catalytic process. Is this trying to reframe what an EVO is? Rediscovering what we already know? I don't know. Again, this is one to watch, I think. I hope this is, you know, I'm interested in this one. Okay, so is everyone bored yet? Right, lunch. Are we still on day 1? No, we're on day 3. Good, excellent. Eric Zyme, detection of alpha particles using CR39 during a deuterium DC glow discharge with palladium electrodes. Okay. Oh dear, really? So Pam Mosier-Boss has a patent for this sort of Stanislav SPAC type. I think it's that, but maybe not. But anyway, doing not necessarily a DC glow discharge, but anyway. A lot of work has been done in DC glow discharge with nickel and other electrodes by Savatamova et al. They've seen transmutation, but the use of CR39 was really put forward as proof of LENR by Lawrence Forsley and Pam Mosier-Boss. And Pam Mosier-Boss fought for a very long time to get her patent awarded. We actually tried to replicate the Pam Mosier-Boss Lawrence Forsley CR39 experiment. And we weren't successful. That was with Ryan Hunt at Hunt Utilities Group early on in the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's history. However, detection of alpha particles using CR39. So what when you've got PD and glow discharge? Glow discharge will create exotic vacuum objects even if you really, 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 really don't want it to. If you're absolutely adamant that you're going to tell your experiment not to produce exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters, and you're using glow discharge, good luck with that, mate. Good luck. It's not going to happen. You're going to be creating them, okay? So, and this is what Savatamova has done extensive experiments over decades. So, you know, and obviously, glow discharge was used by the Carrere brothers. It was used by, I think, Lord Rayleigh in the 1932 or whatever, and they were producing excess heat. I know George Eagley down here, maybe he will talk about it again. Those kind of experiments of replicating the Carrere experiments. The glow discharge will produce charge clusters, sorry. And if you get charge clusters, let's just do a thought experiment here. I'm going to bring up the MFMP's Parkhomov based reaction LENR tables. So I'm going to make a new tab here. And let's go to Nanosoft. I actually have a favourites on here because I would do, wouldn't I? Right, okay. So we're going to zoom in a bit so it's a little bit easier for your eyes, especially those on phones. Okay, so I'm going to do 2-to-2 reactions here, and I'm going to put in here, I'm going to put in deuterium because, well, they're going to be using deuterium. And so the light element goes in at the front here. And we, you know, I didn't do this earlier today, but we're going to do it now. And we're going to see if we can produce any helium. So deuterium and palladium. I'm not going to do any filtering at this stage, but we just do a quick one like this and see what we get. Okay, what do we get? Well, there's a lot of different reactions you can get out there. Oh god, there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot. So I might D and E in PD. I need to put PD in here as well because that's obviously in the mix. And run that. Okay. Oh, there we go. Look, there we go. We got helium-4 and palladium-104. So deuterium and palladium. So we can actually screen that, and we can say, well, and E4 in helium. Okay. And execute query. And so, is that done it? Oh dear, what have I done now? Wrong. I've done something wrong. What have we got here? It did have it there. Anyway, let's see. If I search like this, it's... no, what did I do? Come back to me. I quit the window. Did I quit the window? Oh, no. I didn't mean to do that. What did I mean to do? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. I've just highlighted it this way so you can see. So out of whatever 334 results, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 reactions that produce helium. A lot of the other reactions are producing oxygen that will get bound, and solid elements and other elements that will get bound. So you can produce fissioning or transmutation. Sorry, this is transmutation to another element plus helium. And maybe if we just use our Evo to fission PD, do we get any helium produced by fissioning? Maybe it'll work this time. No, I don't know what I'm doing wrong there. Maybe I need to do equals here. Let's do it like this. I should know how to use this because this is what I'm going to be presenting on. Oh, God. Oh, dear. Let's go back here. Okay, all right, fine. So titanium, chlorine, neon. Well, no, it's an exchange reaction, it would seem here. But anyway, you can get it via the exchange reaction. So, and the interesting thing is when you do have these transmutations, you get these other metals being produced. And so, you know, anyway, the Cl39 is looking for alpha particles. This produces alpha particles even without fusing deuterium with transmutation. So anyway, there you go. Takehiko Ito, analysis of photon radiation for spontaneous heat burst phenomena during hydrogen desorption from nano-sized metal composite. This seems nicely technical. Great. I look forward to seeing that. The Japanese are absolutely fantastic at this and very, very precise. Rakesh Dubey, I don't know this guy. Experimental study of electron emission in the DD reactions at very low energies. So obviously, if we're having EVOs and they blow up, you're going to get electron emission. That's exactly what we saw in Lion. So I'll be interested to see what's observed there. Shyam Sundar Leksar, cutoff voltage for transmutation in light water electrolysis. Again, this is nice. I'm glad that's there. My colleague and friend George Eagley, direct electrical energy production by Lena. I don't know if he's done anything new. I shall reach out to him and find out if he has. Frank Gordon, increasing the output of the lattice energy converter. I really like Frank Gordon. I have made it clear that since I was alerted to it, there is a Japanese awarded patent, I understand, from which predates the attempt of Frank Gordon and his colleague, which really is very similar to the lattice energy converter Anaglass. I've made it very available to the community and don't really see a lot of debate about that. But however, there are simple experiments that Frank has done, and they've been replicated by a number of people. So we've got Antonio Di Stefano here, experimental observations on the Leck effect, and Jean-Paul Biberian, lattice energy conversion replication. So he's going to do an overview of that. If this is actually real, I don't know how they get around the Japanese patent, but maybe there is enough that's unique there. I really hope there is, because, like I say, Frank Gordon is just such a great guy. And so anyway, that's that. But there we go. So and then on July the 28th, is everyone still with me? Okay. Edmund Storms. the nature of cold fusion made simple. Obviously, Edmund Storms, I think he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I think he actually worked on a nuclear rocket propulsion system. Anyway, the first time I really saw Edmund Storms was at ICCF 18, where he gave this plenary lecture, and I think it was, he got up and he says, "You're all wrong, I'm right. Why are you bothering doing research when I'm right?" And it put a lot of people's nose out of joint. But at least he's someone that says exactly what he feels. I believe his understanding has shifted a little in recent years. I think it's certainly from he basically understands the reaction to occur in cracks. However, you don't get many cracks in a plasma, and this is a bit of a challenge for his theory. However, you can get zones where you get compression, and they are on ion acoustic waves, these nodes that we've talked about in the past, where you can get a standing wave, and then there's a node and in a standing wave in the ion acoustic wave. And so you can get it there, so that is kind of like your virtual crack. So essentially what you're saying is you're having an area where you can have, in my view, coherence. And I don't think, Matsumoto is extremely clear that this happens on surfaces and in cracks. And in fact, if you look at, and I'm going to remember his name, the guy who does ectons, please throw it into the blog. I don't know why I can't remember his name today. George, is it George? Anyway, Messias, Mr. Messias. If you look at his 1996 paper, and I've talked about this in a presentation before, just referring to that paper, he literally lists every single thing that everyone has done to try and create LENR. Even the Japanese, Edmund Storms, all of these people are all in that paper, and I think it's even a patent, it might even be a patent, but anyway, it's a paper by George Messias referring to the methods by which you can produce ectons. Ectons are evos, are effectively ball lightning, are itonic clusters, etc. Okay, so we're back on the list here. Konrad Chersky, he is talking about experimental and theoretical arguments for DD threshold resonance in 4 helium. Konrad Chersky, I met him in Azizi. He explains he's the head of one of the European projects. This is the project at which Matthew Velat is working on, this electron screening type approach to this. He might actually be hosting the ICCF 25 in Poland, and that would be great because I wouldn't have to go through any nonsense to get there. In theory, it's just a train ride, and so I hope he does. He is a theoretical guy, and this is represented here. And I'd be really interested to see what their team has managed to achieve with that European funding so far. Anyway, so let's see what happens there. Teresa Benyo, a theory of transmutation observed as a result of deuterium gas cycling of palladium-silver alloy. If you're going to gas cycle in deuterium, because the palladium, and actually often it's a palladium-silver alloy, you will get cracks forming, and this then speaks back to Edmund Storm's theory and also the work of Takaaki Matsumoto. Yiro Kasagi, comparison of excess heat production in nickel copper. This is the same sort of constantan, but they use nanoparticles, I think, with the Japanese. Multi-layer thin film. Okay, so this is similar to the, I think it's one of the Japanese groups that believe that they're close to serious production of excess heat in a reliable way, with hydrogen and deuterium gas. Multi-layer thin film. Thin films obviously is very good because if they're multi-layer, this will be creating lots of metal boundaries, and this is exactly where Edmund Storms will say this type of process occurs, and it's exactly what you see in Hutchison effect. It's exactly what Matsumoto is saying in his work, and this is where you get the electron bunching and the protons form, in particular when you have copper. If you look at, and I haven't done a presentation on this, but I will do at some point. I've referred to this before. There is this diagram, and Matsumoto used copper because copper doesn't like to absorb hydrogen, okay? And so you can see that if you've got a little dimple, you might get a cluster of hydrogens forming a little cluster. If you've got a little bit more of a dimple, you get a bigger one. And then if you've got a really big crack, according to Edmund storms, or you can end up with a very large cluster. And the reason is that if this is the cathode, this is emitting a lot of electrons. So there's a lot of free electrons on the surface here. Okay, and then because it's the cathode, the ionized hydrogen in here, the protons, want to come down and connect to this. Now, if you have nickel and hydrogen, nickel's very good at dissociating catalytically H2 into hydrogen. This gives you a lot of free protons, and if that's the boundary where you've got electron flux going on, you will create little clusters. And so basically it's all argued here. And so the properties of copper combined with the properties of nickel, which is in the Constantan wire of Francesco Celani and is in this work by Jiro Kasagi, speaks to what is well defined here. And by the way, it was George Messias that spelt this out in detail long before. Although this, to just give credit to Takei Matsumoto, this paper is from 1993, and it wasn't until 1996 that George Messias took his understanding into the Western research field, although he was speaking about it long before then. So I believe that there's a good chance of seeing some excess heat with different multi-layers thing here. Jean-Paul Barbarian again, reaction of hydrogen in nickel-based alloys. Obviously, I've just said the nickel is good at dissociating. Now, I've said in the past that the nickel is magnetic. The protons have got a magnetic moment. They bind to the surface of the nickel. When you go past the Curie point, they get released. They're all monochromatic in terms of their energy. This means they can form coherent matter, and you combine that with the electrons on the sea of electrons on the surface, and you get the process for creating coherent matter. And so this is why I believe Piantelli told us precisely to do a whole rigorous loading regime, and when you want to create the conditions for creating low-energy nuclear reactions, according to him, you had to punch through as absolutely fast as possible the nickel Curie point. And therefore, that is what I'm saying. And this is the same argument I give for what is working with HHO in form of Brown's gas when you are doing radiation remediation by Yul Brown. He takes aluminium shavings, he takes iron pieces, and he puts the radioactive material in there. The aluminium absorbs the excess oxygen, because it's a sacrificial anode, from the HHO, from the Brown's gas. This produces a vast number of protons with all these electrons flying around, and in this plasma situation, this causes the production of exotic vacuum objects in the form of the pseudomagnetic monopoles. These bind to the iron nuclei, and then when you go through the Curie point of iron around 790 something degrees centigrade, I think it is, something like that, they all come off monochromatic energy. They can form a coherent matter wave that forms a large macro cluster, which is a ball lightning. This is the flash that occurs, and this is what transmutes the waste. This is what's going on in nuclear reactions, in my view, in a lot of LENR systems, and this is the situation that you're trying to create. Obviously, the Curie point for nickel is below that, cobalt is much higher, and there was work where you had a cobalt and I think it was basically magnet material, so I can't remember, it's the magnet that's got cobalt in it. But anyway, there was this experiment in Hawaii where this guy had this cobalt and samarium, and they were loading deuterium in and out, and so this would fit the understanding very, very clearly. Okay, so Jean-Paul Barbarian, reaction of hydrogen in nickel-based alloys under variable magnetic field. Interesting, variable magnetic field reaction. So this kind of work was done by Anatoly Klimov, where they had some nickel-based material in a tube, and they were heating up with hydrogen, and then they would bring in a magnet. So I'll be interested to see what Jean-Paul Barbarian has to say about that. Natalia Targasos-Slechka, study of LENR with light nuclei in zirconium and nickel-based alloys using ultra-high vacuum accelerator. Don't know this guy, girl, I guess. Shouldn't assume. But anyway, it'd be interesting to see what that happens. Obviously, light nuclei, and you've got zirconium has been identified by Solian as a preferential material. Obviously, nickel Peter Heggleston, ion beam experimental setup and results so far. Looking forward to seeing that. Oliver Barham, Hiver Electrochemistry Energy Project results. Don't know this guy, don't know these results. New, I'm good, I would be keen to see this. Benjamin Barrows, new US Army Lena replication efforts. Oh, that looks interesting, doesn't it? New US Army Lena replication efforts. Hiver, oh, that's this same thing. Co-deposition and gas loading. So co-deposition sounds a bit like the Stanislav SPAC. Again, this is making layers. And so I've explained why layers work. Mono Kumawatt, trends in transmutation products and hydride formation in brass, bronze. Well, obviously we've looked at brass. We haven't looked at bronze so much. Solder, obviously that's a mixed alloy. And silver brazing alloy cathodes during light water electrolysis. This looks really interesting. I'd be very interested to see this presentation. Agata Kowalska, X-ray diffraction, and I think that's what that is. And PAS investigations of deuteron irradiated zirconium samples. Okay, all right. Zirconium is paramagnetic. It has a very low vapor pressure, and maybe if you're firing deuteron ions at it, you have the conditions typical to Solin. So it depends what energy they're using. But anyway, coffee. We're nearly at the end of the technical things. Guido Parchi, don't know him. Maybe should do. Evidence of reproducible tritium production in pulsed electrolytic cell. Okay, well, I've argued that tritium gets released because it's the only radioactive element that is a fermion that is not helium or a helium conjugate nuclei. And so it's been known that Lena produces tritium. It was Thomas Claytor that got credited for that, but other people saw that. It's, at Baroatomic Research Center. The Mahadev and Srinivasan saw tritium production, and other people have seen tritium production. So it is one of these weird kind of radioactive elements that comes out, and in a small degree. And I think it's because, you know, like I say, when you're working with light elements. Okay, Pamela Boss, the case of missing tritium, i.e. there should be much more tritium. Okay, and yeah, the tritium's not there because pretty much everything, in my view, occurs within the cluster, and so it's kind of a balancing thing. If you keep making and breaking it or whatever in a certain type of cycle, you'll probably see more tritium. Okay, Lawrence Forsley, contamination, transportation, or transmutation in Lena material analysis. I like this, Lawrence, and I have argued very, very clearly in a number of presentations, and I will do today, that you can get transportation, forget the contamination argument in this. Obviously you can get contamination, so you could always dismiss things for contamination, okay? But transportation is a specific thing that has been observed by anyone who's accepted the concept of exotic vacuum objects, or string vortex solitons, or microball lightning. We know ball lightning can go through materials and transport things that are within it to another location. What you will see today in the study that I did on Thursday of the Lion 1 reactor outside sheath, where I was wearing my shades, hello, is something where I believe we've got a slam dunk on this process where an exotic vacuum object had transported material. And Ken Shoulders absolutely, very specifically said that was one of his big surprises, the ability to transport material from even through metals. And in fact, the team at Dubna in Science City, over 9 years, absolutely categorized the size, depth and width of pits in film based on the elements that were captured by the string vortex soliton, these black EVOs, or they were white EVOs that then became black. The actual elements that they were teleporting effectively from one place to another. Transportation is something, and I've argued this is something you need to be careful of when you are considering whether you've done transmutation or whether it's being transported. So this is an argument I've done to death. I hope he refers to my work. I seriously doubt he will. Okay, all right. And I hope he refers to Ken Shoulders' work, but I doubt that even more. Please, Lawrence, go and look at... Lawrence, if you're watching this, please go and look at what Ken Shoulders said in his interview with John Hutchinson in 2010. He precisely says what it is. Please go and look at the work of the team at Science City, Dubna, along with Alexander Shishkin, where they've spent 9-10 years characterizing the transportation of material using the things that you don't admit could possibly be doing the thing that you're saying is going on in your reactors. Okay? Please, pay attention, please. Right. Daniel Grunberg. The role of appropriate calorimetric methods for scaling up LENR devices. Yawn. Okay, I'm very sorry, Daniel Grunberg, but if you're trying to do calorimetric, you're just going to get hit every time. Everyone's going to criticize it. They're going to say you didn't do your calculations wrong. They're going to say you didn't have your vapor pressures or your steam phases or whatever. It's going to be so hard. And if you've got a scaled up LENR device and it's producing ridiculous amounts of energy that's so clear to anyone that it's genuinely producing that energy, you don't need calorimetric methods. You can basically see it. So I don't know. I'd be interested to see his view on this. And like all effort to get to the end solution is great. But I've seen the struggle by many of the people even on this presentation roster. That have failed to convince people based on calorimetry. And so there we go. Jacques Rauer, a technological foresight for the future development of different types of LENR energy sources. I'll be very interested to hear. He's very prominent, Jacques, in the French research field. I had the pleasure of having a dinner with him after Azizi's conference. And I've got a lot of time for him. And David Nagel, it's great for having him speak as well. Electron migration and LENR. So, did you miss it? Did you miss it? Okay. So, what am I talking about? Obviously, they're not interested in anything that MFMP has to say for a presentation. What can I say? All right. You try. You can't always get what you want. What happened? I gave a bunch of things that I would like to do and present various people's work, conglomerations of work and insights and so forth. And the one that I thought they would allow me to speak was the reaction calculator. It's being used by a lot of people. We know this. They're using it in their work. It's very good at looking at historical data and predicting it accurately and as a means to doing experiments. I thought, like, when I last went to America, they thought, and I wasn't even talking anything close to this back then, and I wasn't even at that part of thinking. They thought I was going to talk about anti-gravity, so they definitely didn't want me to, on the stage giving a presentation of Parkhomov's nickel hydrogen work. To be fair, they allowed me to present that work at ICCF 22 in the subsequent ICCF. I think, given the fact that Takaaki Matsumoto was shut down by the American Nuclear Society from publishing in ICCF in fusion technology, basically when he realised that this was ball lightning. That was it. That was it. He wasn't allowed to publish again. They changed the rules, and he actually protested in a letter to the editor. So given the fact that I have very specifically said that I believe at least what we're observing in many, many different systems can be explained by ball lightning, and I have to agree with all of those people, like Takaaki Matsumoto, like actually Klimov, Anatoly Klimov, like Ken Shoulders, like all of these people. I'm definitely attaching my hook to that view on these things. And so I knew when I started down this route that sooner or later I'm going to be persona non grata. And in fact, when I was talking about the old guard here, the very first ICCF I went to was Michael McCubry gave a talk because sadly Martin Fleischmann had died 3 weeks before ICCF 12 in South Korea, where I first joined this field. And he said that science advances one death at a time. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of people. but a lot of these people are actually the old guard. And I was told by a former colleague that I needed to stop talking about certain things a number of years ago because the old guard were demanding that. And that if I didn't, I needed to resign from the MFMP. So there is the transition between when I was allowed to talk about what I was allowed to talk about and everything was hunky-dory was basically between not talking about exotic vacuum objects and talking about exotic vacuum objects. That was the transition point. And when I got this huge pushback from, I was told it was the old guard that had met at MIT and decided and passed through this, a former colleague of mine, that I should stop talking about it. I don't know. So I wonder. I didn't expect to be presenting some of the things that I wanted to present, which I think are much more valuable and should be considered. But what they've allowed me to do is, if you look down here, Robert Grenier, using the online MFMP Parkhomov-Lenner reaction calculator to review past data and drive future research. Okay, so they've allowed me a poster. Talking about the thing that I thought they would allow me to talk about on stage. So, I'm very disciplined when it comes to presentations. If I'm going to talk about this, that's what I was going to talk about. And so, anyway, I don't blame them because there's a lot of IP that are basically just get thrown out the window when you realise these things. But what I will say is look at what is in the posters. What a change. Jean-Paul Barbarian. Okay, so he's speaking several times on stage. But vacuum capacitors for energy storage. What are vacuum capacitors? Vacuum capacitors are very specifically a group that is based out of France, based on a Russian technology that is based on Ken Shoulder's exotic vacuum object work. Is this going to be actually addressing this properly? I hope it is, Jean-Paul Barbarian. I hope it is. But this is basically Ken Shoulder's work. Okay? And I believe that I was the person that raised this in the community. So this is great. Ludmila Boldirova, energy between the properties of spin supercurrent and strange radiation accompanying low energy nuclear reactions. Spin supercurrent. So we've got a superfluid, superconducting material that effectively has a spin. It's a supercurrent. And we've got strange radiation. Wow. Okay. So number 1 and number 2 are related to exotic vacuum objects and ball lightning. N.L. Bowen, I don't expect any miracles here. Applying nuclear engineering considerations to the nuclear active environment. No. N.L. Bowen, and I like this person. The electromagnetic considerations of nuclear force, part 3, and analysis of electromagnetic contributors. So I can't read much into that. Steve Kesselman, cold fusion via atomic compression. You mean like the atomic compression that Matsumoto talks about here, which is caused by ball lightning? Or are you talking about the atomic compression that's talked about by Stanislav Adamenko and Vladimir Vysotsky, which is effectively a ball lightning? Don't know. Be interesting to see what he has to say. Arik Dang-Yan, I don't know this guy. Electron bound state considering magnetic dipole-dipole interaction. Don't know what this is. Obviously, we're getting bound states with electrons and electrons. If you have 2 electrons in a bound state, then that would be, what would that be? That would be 2 fermions making a boson, okay? And magnetic dipole. This could be interesting. It could be another argument saying how you get condensed electrons, but we know they condense. Sorry, it's literally in the Lockheed Martin Coherent Matter patent. It's literally in the Lockheed Martin Coherent Matter patent. If they are saying we can do X, Y, and Z with coherent matter, this is how you produce it. And the way that they're saying you produce it is by using Ken Shoulder's method, which, by the way, is the same as the death ray from Tesla. But they're passing it over a magnet, which helps with the clustering, and it's got a bit of Aharonov bomb effect in there to get the phases in phase. But it's making coherent matter. But we know we can make this in the Vega experiment. We know we can make this in ultrasonics. So, okay. But it's good that these things are being discussed. Fabrice David, direct conversion of lead inside solid-state fusion diodes. I think it's a great shame. David Fabrice, he's a French guy, and he came up with this thing called the solid state, the fusion diode, and to all intents and purposes, this is another very similar thing to the lattice energy converter. And you know, I would have liked to have seen him have a presentation out there. And the question is, and I will talk about this in a minute, is it really worth for him to go? Well, I will tell you that if you do not go, they do not put the poster up in the conference. It just gets put online, and you can speak to it online, but you can't speak to people in person, and so on. So, and it doesn't have that presence at the conference. So, is it worth him going? I don't know. It's always worth meeting the people in the field and the people that are interested in the field that aren't speakers. But I would like to have seen this as a higher profile. Okay. Luis DiCario, Heva, well, this is this military research, so it would be interesting. I didn't know Luis DiCario was involved with this Heva stuff, but it's interesting. Heva electrochemistry NG produced nuclear tracks. Okay, what produced nuclear tracks? Kjeld Engvild, any independent replications of the Hubler effect? Okay, maybe. Andrew Exon, progress in constructing, testing, and detecting radiation from lattice energy converters. Another paper on lattice energy conversion. This is good because I like the fact that so many people have attempted to replicate this. Lawrence Forsley, Lena in low flux neutron spectrometry. Okay, a spectroscopy. Lena low flux neutron spectroscopy. Is it, sorry Lawrence, but are we talking about real neutrons or fake neutrons? Real neutrons or fake neutrons? Please, I want to see what he's talking about here in relation to what experiments. Luciano Onda Freire, possible explanation of Lena charge cluster microreactors. Wow. Luciano Onda Freire, possible explanation of Lena charge cluster microreactors. What, you mean like micro ball lightning? Is that what you mean, Luciano? Do you mean micro ball lightning, like is being said by Matsumoto Takaki or by Shishkin or by Ken Shoulders? Is that what you mean? Why can't they give direct credit to these people that have, or you know, messiats? Why can't they give direct credit? Why can't they say something like, was Ken Shoulders, Takaki Matsumoto and George Messiat's correct, and charge clusters are acting as microreactors for the Lena process? I don't know, but maybe this clever little title got him to a poster, but it didn't get him to make a presentation. Why? Because it's peer reviewed by who? The old guard. Here we go. My least toxic presentation gets pushed over to being a poster. Joseph Gokas, Lena on surfaces or in plasmas. Lena on surfaces. What you mean like this? Like this? Or virtual nodes in ion acoustic waves. Okay, all right. It is in the plasma, but it's in effectively a surface. It's the surface of the node. Peter Hagelstein, matrix elements for HD3 helium and D2 4 helium transitions. Peter Hagelstein, off-resonant NG shifts, the lowest, and this is more the same work. I would have liked to have seen Bin Juan Huang give a presentation. Generation of excess energy from two-phase flow. I know he advances his work each year. This is the guy who's at the Department of Energy at Taipei University. He's replicated the ultra experiments. He's found the same kind of production of silicon and carbon on the yin-yang type structures, but on copper in this case, copper which doesn't absorb hydrogen, and so that's very nice. Mikhail Ivanov, single physics of condensed and non-condensed matter, fundamental laws of constants, can't read much into that. Sung Ho Yo, anomalous temperature increase of boron carbide block near an electrical and chemical cell, a new experimental approach to Lena. Obviously, we've got boron. I've spoke at length boron in Piantelli's experiments, in the work of Francesco Celani, and so on. Boron is very, very important. Obviously, boron and carbide, you've got two Lena foods there. Matthias Kazmarski, I guess this is some member of the team. So it's a member of the team from one of the European projects. Latest upgrade of University of Shishin accelerator system for fusion reactions below 1 kilo electron volt. This is great. This is great. I tell you why this is great, because when I was at the University of Aarhus, they mocked me for saying you could do fusion below 4 mega electron volts with their accelerator. And they are saying here that there is a specific modification to their accelerator system to attempt to create fusion reactions below 1 kilo electron volt. Okay, now what is the work of Dr. Parkhomov is saying that if you have 0.5 of an EV, because 1 kilo electron volt is actually very high energy, even though it seems low. If you have enough 0.5 EV, you can produce a neutrino-antineutrino cold neutrino pair, and that they can affect transmutations. This is not considered by University of Shishin. It's a shame, but I would imagine that they would have some success. But you don't need to go to that excess. You can just get some light bulbs. Mikhail Kashenko, synthesis of silicon in the interaction of aluminium with quasi-neutron, and estimation of contribution of aluminium hydride complex. Be interested to see what that is. Obviously, we see silicon being synthesized with aluminium. Let's dump a proton into it. Tamataka Kobayashi, estimation of the heat generation of metal composite powder absorbing the pulse flow of hydrogen gas. Be interesting. Don't know. Andres Kovacs. Now, Andres Kovacs is a great thinker. He's got he's rethought the Maxwell equations, working with some Italian authors. He is actually a member, I think, of the other European-funded project. Proposed a proposal, unified field theory. So this is his book where they're talking about this. It's a shame he didn't get a presentation, but I don't know whether he will see that it's worthwhile going in a poster presentation. But there we go. Ankit Kumar, correlating transmutations, excess ionizing radiation in light water electrons, unsteady and periodic high potentials. I'd like to see that. I think this is from one of the Indian groups that saw excess heat. Emmanuel Marano, development and testing of high precision data acquisition system. Great to have some technology focused on this field. Again, design construction of characteristics. Again, calorimeter, but again, I've told the problems with that. Charles Martin, confinement-induced electron capture. Confinement-induced electron capture. Be interested to see what that is. Melvin Miles here, new applications of lower bound method for isoparabolic calorimetry. Looking for the excess heat. Melvin Miles, the first cold fusion experiments reporting correlation between excess heat and helium-4 production. This is a historical review. He's very good at this. He was at the beginning. Shinya Narita, heat evolution in hydrogen deuterium desorption with palladium foil coated with metal membrane. This is interesting for the layer type basis. Here we go. Anatoly Nikitin. This, again, he's a Russian. I don't think he'll be able to attend in purpose, but I would watch out for this one. This guy is good at this. He's done some good studies. Strange traces of strange radiation. Again, we have another paper talking about strange radiation. We've got another one up here. This is exotic vacuum objects. We've got several people that are coming down and talking about this. Christos Papageorgiou, Pap Lena, interpreting the process of generating low-energy nuclear reactions. I don't know whether this is not Pap as in Joseph Pap. Don't know about that. Chandraman Patil, transparent isoparabolic calorimeter for Lena research. Again, it's a calorimeter. Benjamin Peacher, studies of Lena triggering mechanism using pressurized nanoparticles. Prahlada Ramaro, validation of excess energy in the H2 loaded palladium system. Okay, Roger Stringham. I would like to have seen Roger Stringham be able to give a presentation, but he moved from sort of ultra type experimental frequencies, 23 to 46 kilohertz, to the megahertz when he was working with Tom Claytor. And obviously he found more areas where the transmutation was occurring, and of course my view is that there's more nodes that occurs, and to be honest he thinks something similar even back as far as 2013. So he is in Hawaii, he is quite an elderly gentleman, so it might just be that he didn't want to attend and he chose to make a presentation, so it would still be interesting to see that. Mitchell-Schwarz impedance spectroscopy can distinguish active zirconium oxide, palladium, nickel, deuterium nanotype components. Okay, this is his nanotechnology. Mitchell-Schwarz, deuterium momentum, and Umweg factor limit successful coefficient. So he does these wonderful technical papers. Fran Tanzella, prompt gamma radiation measurements in Brillouin's reactor. I'll be interested. This guy is very accomplished. He worked at SRI, I believe, and it'd be interesting to see this gamma radiation, particularly if it is prompt in Brillouin's reactor, or absence of it. Gennady Tarasenko, formation of primary helium in Earth. Gennady is thinking about this synthetic, this Earth being a reactor. I agree with him, and I will do a short article next week on the production of hydrocarbons. It's something that I thought a long time. I've spoken about it a couple of times. So I actually spent 5 minutes doing a research earlier in the week on this, and it's pretty clear that is what's going on. And helium is a very important indicator that this is actually a linear process rather than just a pure pressure and chemical process. Which is what the main proponents of the abiotic theory of hydrocarbon production are talking about. And they don't consider linear process also for the synthesis of the hydrogen and carbon, and I will address that in the short presentation during the week. Okay, so Sergei Chetkov, evaluation of the possibility of using helium, I guess, leak detector for analysis of protein, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's good. Vladimir Vysotsky, again, undapped thermal waves. So thermal waves, he's saying, is effectively some type of this strange radiation. And it might be this scalar wave, but in the form of thermal waves. And peculiarities of pulsed LENR and thermally stimulated biochemical reactions in interaction of viruses with cells. Always incredibly fantastic work and very interesting. Always pay attention to what Vysotsky has to say. LENR solution for fundamental mysteries of the solar corona. Couldn't agree more, Vladimir. Anomalously high temperature and anomalous helium-3 concentration. Harper Whitehouse, which is the other part of the Frank Gordon team that came up with the LEC conduction analysis, including diffusion of ions. Wu Shenzhang, reproduction of excess heat using palladium boron cathode measured by sea-level calorimeter. And the last one you'll be pleased to hear, Eric Zyme, anomalous phenomena of the surface of CR39. The CR39 is what they make these lenses from. Okay, it's a fairly scratch-resistant polymer, which is good for post-etching for showing, for instance, triple tracks and helium tracks in proximity to DC plasma. So there we go. Is anyone bored? Right. So that is what you can expect from ICCF. I will go back to my presentation and just talk around a couple of the slides regarding this. So okay. So the topics today was ICCF 24, and I have a separate slide on that. So I've given a link here. You can copy that link, and that is access to the presentations. This is access to the posters. I have to be honest that when I was thinking about whether I should go, the costs are quite a lot of money. This $2,500 buys the same amount of time that I've spent on the scanning electron microscope so far, since I got access to this large table 1 in Prague. Is it really worth it to you and to the project for me to go and burn $2,500 that could do another 5 days, excluding my time and other sundries? Another 5 days looking at samples that I have a pile of from the field. Are we going to learn more, or is it going to benefit the community more? I would like your opinions on that. But then we've got the logistics, and the big logistic for me is the experimental jab. I do not want to take it. I do not want to put myself at risk. My father and grandfather both died of heart attacks. My grandfather died at 52. It's a major risk for all of these medications. And we know they don't work, and there's no benefit to someone like me that's already had the sniffles. And so I don't want to leave my children fatherless. And so I had a weighing equation. I didn't expect them to allow me to talk about some of the more hard data-based experimental data sets, which are repeatable and work across multiple authors and explain so much, because that is just too much of a head rush for those that have all kinds of IP to protect, to find out that basically this is all being discussed by the likes of Takaaki Matsumoto, by Ken Shoulders, by Messiat, and that most of the methods are already driving towards exotic vacuum objects, ball lightning, itonic clusters, and so forth. And so is that really going to be worthwhile? I absolutely am going to produce the poster. I wanted to give it as a presentation because Philip Power did an amazing job working on the calculator. I think it's been transformational in my understanding of the experiments, and both past and current, and it has driven experiments that we have attempted to do, and we've got results that were predicted by the experiment. So for instance, the tungsten experiments with Amarza gas and which we've now replicated with David Boutillier, which match historical findings. This was helped, and the use of indium, for instance, this was helped by that calculator. And we know other people have used that calculator and have reached out to me over the last several years to learn how to use the calculator. So it's about time that we have a proper paper. It's in the proceedings of ICCF about that. But it would be nice to go and be able to stand by the poster and talk people through it, but it's kind of like a consolation prize for someone and for an organisation that has involved so many people doing such fantastic work. But we're not military. We're not funded by a big university. We haven't got any big budgets from the European Union or from the Japanese government or from whatever. We're socially funded, driven by social crowd intellect, and we really are kind of a bit of a problem for a lot of the people that refer to themselves as the old guard, and that is it. So, but the logistics for me is, I would have hoped when the airline industry said, look, please, can we remove all of these remaining restrictions by the 1st of June? Well, we're on the 5th of June. They've not been removed. And basically, there's hardly anyone in the world dying from this thing right now. And most of them that are in the fully jabbed. Certainly those that are dying in the Antipodean countries should have been fully jabbed, and so it's beyond farcical that we're in this situation. So my view right now is I don't want to take the risk. If the draconian and fascist rules, which are completely unnecessary and not valid and have no purpose of any real merit for someone that has already recovered twice from this disease and didn't suffer any worse than the 3 episodes of food poisoning in his life, and much less worse than infectious mononucleosis. There's just simply no reason for me to have it, and it's all risk. And what is the benefit? If they remove the rules, then of course I will go. And Alan Goldwater is very happy to host me in his camper van in a campsite which is about 8 kilometers away, and provide a bike for me to cycle into the conference daily to minimize the costs there. I have the costs actually of the conference because the organization that Alan runs is a not-for-profit. It can come in at the lower rate for that. If I present remotely, it will be about a third the cost for that, but it's all the ancillary costs and the flights. And I think probably the project would be better spent, money may be better spent elsewhere. So yes, Peter Diamantis is going to be there, and there's going to be people from the military, and there's going to be people from the investor community, but really they've shown that they are contemptuous of the efforts of the project, and that is a real shame. You know, I wish that wasn't the case, but there's a lot of IP to protect, and as I said at the beginning of 2017, by the time of this process concluding, pretty much everyone in the field is going to hate what has been what is being suggested is the process that occurs. So that was very evident to me, and so moving forward, we've got to understand that probably working with the European community, who seem to be more open to hearing the work that the MFMP has done, and particularly the Russian community, it looks like the best of the work will not be able to be shown to the American community. And that is a huge disappointment to me, because by far, absolutely by far, the American community has been the biggest supporters of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. And I mean the real people that are interested in this field, not the people that are in this field that are interested in getting something out of it. It's the real people that are interested in this field that have been by far the biggest supporters of our work. So I thank people. I would like people to maybe. I'm going to try the medical exemption route. Here's the crux. There's one preparation I would consider, which is the protein-based Novavax, which wasn't approved in the US, but is approved now, and it will allow you to travel there. It's 3 weeks apart, 2 doses, and you need 2 weeks. I have a hard cut-off date in 10 days' time, right? And 10 days' time happens to be the 15th of the month, which is one of these dates which has been earmarked as a potential date that the rules might change. But I believe there is a desire to keep fascism alive and well in certain countries, and they are not going to relinquish the power and the ability to bend rules that have been enabled by this Sniffles. And so yeah, so I don't know if that would change. So it's the Novavax which is really the only choice, but it's the principle of the thing. I don't want to play a role in enabling life to only be permitted when you submit yourself to an experimental therapy. I don't want to be part, and I don't have to be. And if the community that run the prestigious conference is not really interested in the work that this community has generated in a serious way, then is the money, as I say, better spent on doing hard work rather than turning up and being sidelined. So I don't know. Like I say, I do think it's important to go there. I couldn't go to China because that was basically impossible. And so, but it's the logistics. There's no problem with me finding a flight in a couple of days and getting there and finding accommodation. That's going to happen. So my view on it is, right the way up to a few days before the conference, I will be prepared to throw things into a bag and go if some sanity returns with respect to the Sniffles. When we get down, when we're very close to the number of people dying globally when this thing was announced, and all of the trends are down, even in countries which are in their winter months, it's beyond farcical. It's beyond farcical. Okay, so I believe the cost benefit for the community and for me personally is better that I don't take a risk with my personal health and allow this forced compliance to persist. So that's about where I am with that. It fills me with great sadness, to be honest, to be put into this position. But there we go. Okay. Okay, I'm just reading a couple of your comments before I move on to the next section, which will not be as windy as that last section, you'll be pleased to know. But very interesting. Yeah, so no, I thought Novavax would not have the cardio and other problems, but it's very clear now that the spike protein itself is a vast chunk of the disease. And given the fact that my body has been exposed to it twice and successfully got through it, literally putting a poison into my body to please fascist authorities so I can exist with all the freedoms I had before they invented this thing, is not a game I want to be playing. And so, and I don't want to be taking that Russian roulette, because, you know, what actually is in that preparation. So when I read the risks and the fact that it's been effectively less tested on human lab rats than the other preparations, it clearly doesn't have the risk profile, because it's just protein. It's not getting your body to make the thing that is the worst part of the disease for many people. It is just that pathogen in there, but it has adjuvants, and the adjuvants are forcing your body to react to it. And people take their choices, and I don't feel it's necessary for me to take that choice. Alex de Castallo, why waste time with people who want to patent nature anyway? I completely agree. But, there are some great people there. And what you are seeing in this conference, with what I've gone through there, is even some of the old guard are edging and nudging in sideways some of these concepts that we've been researching over the last several years. And people that are in the poster presentations are talking about strange radiation. They're talking about clusters. That the tide is changing. But with the work that we're doing on the bagels and the easy to replicate experiments, one of the proposals I was proposing for a presentation was the ultra experiment. And it's like, well, why would you not want, when you've seen over many decades transmutation being clearly shown by the likes of Stringham, who's actually in a poster session there, as you saw, and Leclerc, who showed it at the US Naval Research Labs and showed the transmutation there. When you have these ultrasonic systems that are doing that, and you've simplified it down to where literal idiots can do the experiment, right, with a proven track record in the past, and people like Binjuan Huang replicating similar phenomena using similar frequencies, using different metals, then why would you not want that to be public? Why would you not want that to be public? I think, if I was to put my conspiracy hat on, not that it's not conspiracy, but if I was to say that this was a conspiracy, I would say that maybe they don't want to hear that this is actually really rather simple and nature is doing it all the time, because they want to have this mystery about what it does and be able to write all these long documents about that it's doing it in some mysterious way. Yeah, David, I agree. This is someone who I respect. My office partner here, she has a friend in Italy, and Italy had some of the most ridiculous restrictions. And she was an airport worker. And the airport workers were told, you have to get the jab or you have to have recovered from the disease. Otherwise, you cannot do your job. And basically, that's what she'd done for decades. And so that's what she knew. She wasn't going to about to go out and change her life at that stage in her life. She tried to catch the sniffles any single way she could possibly find. She was finding anyone that had it. She would go around their houses. She would eat from their plate. She would try and drink from their cups and so on. She actually went to the extreme level of taking someone's COVID swab where they'd done a PCR test and they'd been given a positive COVID test. And she took that swab, she put it up her own nose and her son's nose. And it was all over in 2 and a bit days. Right? And then she could go back to work. How ridiculous is it that a mature woman should deliberately have to infect herself and her child in order that she can provide for her child? How ridiculous is that from a disease that would pose no risk to her or her child? It's absurd what we have allowed to happen to us. This must never happen again. It must never happen again. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I think I've got something rather interesting hypothesis-wise, and I would like your views on it, please, on remote view or in the YouTube chats afterwards. And this is the possible explanation for eruptions in coherent matter transmutations. So you will know from previous presentations that I have shared this a set of data from the Lion 1, where this is the inside of the quartz tube. So we have this quartz tube here, like this, and it produces these marks. And I don't know if you can see because, but no, you can't see, but there's actually one very, very clear toroidal mark on here. And I will image this at some time. Maybe I'll put my hand behind it. You see that white spot? That's an absolutely perfectly isolated toroidal mark, and bizarrely it's on not at all on the inside of the tube, but it's on the outside of the tube. So this is a wonderful example of one pole. And I'll put my hand behind that little spot. If actually I do that, you can see that mark. You probably actually even see the toroid there, and it's on the outside, it's not on the inside. Okay, so this has teleported itself through this fused quartz of the Lion 4, one of the sides of the Lion 4 reactor. Incidentally, both of the Lion 4 reactor cores were live, so we will do a breakdown of this second core, which we didn't take apart in the live stream of the take apart of the Lion 4 reactor. Okay, so that was this was from the Lion 1, and what we found was these are, in my view, the north poles, because they are pushing material out so they don't damage the center, and these are south pole, south pole, south pole, south pole, and they are ramming material in. There's a south pole here, and you can actually see that these north poles come together because they're the same pole, and this is rotating this way and this is rotating this way. You have an interference between that and this, and so you get an interference zone where it's quiet and it doesn't damage the quartz. Now, when I say rotating, sorry, I'm not showing you, am I? I'm talking about this. We got these are north poles, north pole, north pole. This is south pole, 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 south pole. They can form groups, and you've got a group here of 3 north poles, and this is rotating here, and sorry, go back. This is rotating here, rotating around the same way, rotating around the same way here, and as this comes down this way, this one's coming up here this way, so you have an interference pattern, so it doesn't damage the material here. When I say rotating, the actual exotic vacuum object is not rotating. It's swirling the material around it, and you can think about this like those experiments you can see on YouTube where they have a neodymium magnet and they have an electrode to it, and then they have a counter electrode, and you get this spin vortex of bubbles. And you've seen it with the freezing of water in and the spiral vortex structures you get in freezing of water where you have a neodymium magnet in there. So it's the spin field of the magnetic structure, and I've described how, because it's a self-similar structure, the substructures are spinning one way, and the 90 degrees they're spinning this way. And combining the two, you end up with this vortical spinning of material around it, which would probably make people think that that's the shape of what's going on, but actually it's how the spin is interacting with material. Okay, so So we have this spin thing, and you can see on this top edge, it's actually moved material in this dense line. And as it goes from this side to this side, it gets denser and denser, okay? In this one, you can see it's swept material around, and then it's bounced on this one. Again, these are two north poles, and with this interference zone in between. And it's actually swept things off, and it's shot it off the end. It's actually thrown the material off the end there with so much sweeping going on. And so I highlight this with these models of the pseudomagnetic monopole and talk about the particle flow. Now, so this is material moving around the EVOs. I'm going to talk about material moving inside because we know that these produce a flow not only around the outside but out and down through the center, or in one way or the other, depending on whether it's a north or south pole. And then eruptions from EVOs. So this is going to tie into what we showed potentially as the skin of toroidal and spherical large exotic vacuum object clusters. So here we've got a bunch of south poles, and I've shown this before, and this is a bunch of north poles. So you can see these here, and they are sweeping the material around. So it's sweeping around here, and throwing it out there. And here, sweeping it around here, sweeping it around, going down and throwing it out here. Okay, so these are the structures. And some contextual slides here you'll have seen before, and I'm going to quickly go through these things. This is the Solon patents. He observed all of the material long before the Lion reactors ever came into my possession, of all of the features that we observed on Lion, and he has these combination of electromagnetic, gravitational, and nuclear interactions in it, producing generation of coherent radiation and nuclear phase transmutations, and he's producing all of these elements. Helium there, we were talking about that earlier, in particular carbon and calcium and so on. So note these elements, hold these elements if you can in your head. Helium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, potassium, calcium, sodium, aluminium, magnesium, silicon and iron. Hold those elements in the head as we look at what we found on the Lion reactor this week. These are the nucleation of magnetically charged particles in it of two types. You can only have like positive magnetic charge and negative magnetic, or shall we say north and south. Superconducting superfluid, blah blah blah. Magnetic charges that automatically arise are maintained in its volume, lead to the decay of protons. So this is transmutation. This is achieved by creating condensate of self-compression. Self-compression. You see all these things in these papers from ICCF 24, but it's all here in 1992 of superconducting nuclear condensate. Okay. Now, listen to this. Due to the formation of mobile active centers, domains, in the active medium, they have the form of hollow spheres and cylinders. Hollow spheres and cylinders. Now, in the terms of cylinders, I'm saying it is a capped tube, right? It is a tic-tac, and you can just extend it, right? So this is what we are seeing in the Vega Valley behind, right? Here, this is a cylinder there, and can I show it like that? Like that. That's a cylinder. And then at the end you have a cap. This is another cylinder branch. This is a branch with a cap. And inside here, nuclear reactions occur. Okay, so this is what was observed and stated by Solon. And so we've also observed this torus, and I spoke about this in the presentation last week. And a torus really is it's a hollow cylinder that's closed in on itself, right? So you got a cylinder here with a cap, and it's just bent round and come down, and there we go. So it's all the same thing. It's just the available options that you would have. It's a tic-tac, a sphere, and a sphere, and a torus. Okay. Inside them, nuclear fusion reactions occur. Magnetically contaminated particles are generated and accumulate with generation of superconducting currents. Electromagnetic, nuclear, and gravitational forces are combined with the formation of coherent radiation. Active centers whose shells are composed of superconducting nuclear condensate rotate. Okay, the superconducting nuclear condensate rotates. They have a magnetic and gravitational field. You can see it's all in here. Thus, active centers act as gravimagnetic rotors in local zones. And this is what you will see with those twisted things. This local zone, you've got this cone and this spike coming out. Thus, active centers act as gravimagnetic rotors in the local zones in the areas of their accumulation in the active medium for superconducting current, eddy currents, and circular waves with white glow, pulsations, and local explosions, orderly directed, self-accelerating mass flows in the form of cone and cylinder arise. Okay, and so this is the tentacles that you see coming out of that structure that I showed you last week. Okay, so what are these kind of eruptions? This is the kind of eruption you can see in the freely available downloadable book that we made available of Takaaki Matsumoto from 2000. Eruption of carbon film from lead ball. This is a lead sphere. And this was in a system that was perfectly carbon free. So he had a lead wire in light water, H2O, with potassium hydroxide, KOH. There was no carbon in this. And from a point here, you get this plume of carbon coming from the inside of this ball. Here, this is another lead ball, and this is a plume of carbon. How does all of this carbon fit into there? Very, very easily, because lead is 204, 206, 7 and 8 nucleons, and carbon is typically 12 or 14. You shouldn't get the 12 or 13. You shouldn't get the 14 because that is radioactive, and this system would not like to produce that. Largely, this will be carbon 12 spewing out of here. Here is another one. This is a sphere. The structure of the sphere, you can see it also looks like little subspheres. It is self-similar. Different elements, when they freeze out of, in my view, the coherent state, they will present themselves in a state that is like the oxides of that particular element, and so you would see different structures, but you can see it, this kind of wave-like structure here with these hole and then these lumps here and stuff. It's not too dissimilar from the model that I drew, but here is a hole that's been burst out of, and this is very similar to the crenellated iron sphere that we saw on the Vega Valley Eastern Plateau, where we actually had these prolapse of these two disks which contained other elements that were identified by Serlian and others as synthesized by the Lennon process, and it actually spewed out silicon and carbon and oxygen, but predominantly carbon, which we saw in that trail that was coming out of it. So we've seen this in the Vega Valley experiments of Henk Uren, and here is carbon films that they also generated as well. Well, with Amasa gas on indium, we saw these eruptions, literally like a volcano. You have this thing that grows up, there's this spray of pure indium that was on the top of the volcanic magma chamber, which is, in my view, this exotic vacuum object, which blew out, and it blew out these silicon and carbon structures. If you look at this, you have here, so 383, this structure here is 51.63% carbon and 40.49% oxygen. So if you take what we've got here, we have 92 and a bit percent triple alpha and quad alpha, and if you take carbon and oxygen, you make silicon, and that gives you your elements that you see there, and of course indium is just the balance, which is basically nothing. So this is spewing out. This, in my view, is almost identical to this kind of structure coming out of the lead ball, a very different element, and Matsumoto says that it doesn't matter what element you give it, you will see this. And again, there is this debris field of the ejected material. Here again, you have these ejections. These are carbon films, like observed by Matsumoto. This structure here, let's see what this is. This is 37% carbon, 42% oxygen, and the balance is indium. In this sphere, this is literally a prolapse from a volcanic magma chamber going on under here, and this is as this erupted, the heat release on the failure of the coherent matter underneath the surface of this indium spewed out pure indium, which instantly oxidized and produced these beautiful octahedral indium crystals. And here we have this carbon film, and this carbon film is so ridiculously identical to some of the carbon films, not particularly this one here, but the other. There's literally a drawing of a typical carbon film that was synthesized by Matsumoto, and it's basically identical to the same as this one here. But again, this is an eruption here, and you can see by the analysis here that it is carbon and oxygen predominantly here. And I've got a sample here, 402 here, 403, whereas 403 is a little black circle in this part of what could be a yin-yang, and you can see here it's got iron and silicon in there as well, and this is the sort of thing that is observed by many authors. Okay, so lastly we have this structure, and I've copied, you can see where I've copied this slide from. This is this X structure with the two pairs counter-rotating vortices coming together, and it produces this X-shape field structure, which we have here. And on these nodes, on the ends, you get the synthesis of the elements being spewed out. And this is in the paper. And we'll look at this paper in a little while. Okay, so let's go back to the introduction slide here. So we've shown that material moves around exotic vacuum objects, and we can observe that something happens inside an EVO cluster and we get eruptions from it. We've seen the eruptions. Now, what am I talking about? This is something I need to now bring in my model that I made, and to try and describe my hypothesis for what is going on. And it explains most of the remaining doubts about how LENR works, in my view, and why we observe these physical embodiments of multiple authors across multiple independent experiments spanning decades of experimentation. And if you just give me a second, I'm going to load up Modeler. Okay. So I'm going to load two models up. Bear with me a second. Thank you for sticking with me. I think we're going to have a beautiful series of data and tonight. It's a real honor. It's always an honor to be able to share these things with you. Now, I haven't modeled this. I have to say that the author of the Rope Editor Plus that I worked with in 2004 to 2006 got back to me today. He cut me a new copy of the Rope Editor Plus, which works with the very last edition of Lightwave, and a new license to work with the license that I have currently paid up for. And so I should be able to start modeling 3D models, which I will share, of various types of torus, and I think that will be relevant for people to understand this at a greater detail and use it in animations to describe what's going on. And I think that would be valuable for the community at large. Okay, so what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about this cluster of clusters, and if you remember when I first started talking about this, I'm saying that if this was one single magnet, it is spinning things around and to the outside, okay? And because it does that, it passes things around through the gap, and then it passes it onto this one, and it passes it onto this one. But there's also maybe a little bit spin around here. And so as this passes onto this one, it's moving over and it's moving over, and then it moves onto this one, and it's moving over. And then you end up with these toroidal and poloidal spin fields around it, but the actual things themselves do not move on any fractal level. They are just influencing the spin of the matter and shifting it because of that. And it might be that it's shifting, say, relic neutrinos, and they are pushing the material along, and so that is why you get those damage patterns. Anyway, we simplified this structure for the sake of building the flower of life structure, as I call it, which I believe is a key part of LENR. And by building out the substructures here in this equivalent of the how should we put this, the fixed and pointing vectors of the Zverblis and Nevesky work for that classified research, we end up with this flower of life structure. Okay, now if you can imagine, this is our skin. This is the skin, in my view, that we have observed on spheres by a wide range of experiments. But it was Alan Goldwater's ultrasonic experiment that ran for less than 1,000 seconds using aluminium foil in light water in a $35 ultrasonic cleaner that produced the largest spheres we have seen to date outside of the NOVA reactor from 2017. He had one that was broken, and so we actually saw the inner iron layer, which is this layer, in a similar way to that we saw in the toroidal structure that I shared in the last presentation. Now, if you can imagine if you can imagine, and bear with me for this, if this is interacting with material and churning it up, as we absolutely saw it was doing on the copper pipe of Henk Uren from his Vega experiment, and it's cutting and not affecting material here, but we know it sweeps around the boundary material, you can imagine that material would be swept around this boundary and go through this hole, right? And it might be that some goes in and some comes out. Or it all goes in. Now, if we are arguing that potentially it all goes in, then what will happen? Let's say this is the outside where it's consuming our copper pipe, but the material is going through this superconducting, superfluid matrix, which is highly stable, and it pushes material to the inside. What it's doing as it goes through this process, I believe, if we are to believe the understanding of Takaaki Matsumoto, it is converting protons, let's say, into neutrons and producing a positron and a neutrino and capturing the electron from the material. So any neutron passes through. Any proton is converted to another neutron, and a positron, a neutrino, and the electron that's always associated with every proton in any element in the periodic table is then converted into the itonic cluster, which would be here. So that's one way of thinking about it, but it doesn't really matter. What I'm saying is it goes through these center of these vortex, okay, and it goes to the inside. Now I'm going to switch to the spherical model here because it might help us visualize this better. So we've got our little patch of our overall structure here, and material is going through the center here, and it's going into the center. The coherent matter that's absorbing the material around it, as we saw it consuming the material in the copper pipe of Henk Uren, it is converting that into the coherent layer, and it's throwing neutrons into the center. Okay, throwing neutrons into the center. Okay, and it might actually be still throwing full atoms in. There might be some nuclei that make it through without being fully converted into neutrons, and they go into this core, and they are put under immense pressure. This is the very small box I've been referring to for a very long time. This is the very small box. This is trying to fit a lot of matter into a very small box. And if you are doing that, the most energetic process you can do is the one that produces the smallest volume. This is the smallest surface area for the largest volume. So it's all self-consistent. The understanding is all self-consistent. Now, what I believe is happening is that at some point you get enough clusters here or in here to produce a self-collapse, and so you get a mini nova going on. Or what happens is the pressure of the material in here, or the rate at which this is asymmetrically consuming matter, leads to a weakness in one or more of these pointing vectors, these superfluid, superconducting condensate structures. And by the way, whilst these look individual, they're probably all sharing the energy so that they are all effectively one coherent matter body. This is a way of visualizing it because it needs to be visualized somehow, but effectively this is a skin which is of a particular thickness, which will probably get bigger, the thickness, but typically in the systems that we can produce, they typically are around a micron, but they seem to be thicker in the ultrasonic system, and that might be because it's able to resonantly hold it at a particular node in the yin-yang structures for a longer period of time. But anyway, so the material that's been consumed leads to the production of this thing, and then what happens periodically in some systems is the containment structure fails, and this would happen in ordinary ball lightning also, and it spews its guts. And that is what you are seeing in it spews its guts, and that is what you are seeing here. This is a very small section of our overall structure that that failed, and it spewed the internal structure. This was maybe a larger section, and it just spewed the stuff that was inside the sphere. This is a large chunk that blew out. Now, we have observed these structures which have hollow or disc-like shaped structures coming out or broken in various areas in Henk Uren's different experiments, and I've pointed to those a couple of times. And so what I'm saying is that is essentially what's going on. Now, if we go back to the model, if this is as Solin is saying, that this is a superconducting, superfluid condensate, and I believe it is, and I believe everything is pointing to that. If you do have nuclear reactions going on here, because some actual nuclei get through, right, into the interior, but they're under such incredible magnetic pressure and actual physical pressure within this structure, that they produce a nuclear reaction that would produce a gamma ray. Well, if we go back to the Schwerblis paper, the Schwerblis paper is essentially saying that these pointing vectors that you see here, if these are what they are in the superfluid superconducting condensate, they can take two 511 keV photons that come out from positron and electron annihilation and can capture that energy and share it amongst the two pointing vectors, right? Well, if that's the case for those photons, why isn't it the case for any other photons? Any photons at all? So your nuclear reactions, let's say, are going on inside this very small box. Some of them produce gamma rays. They come out and they hit these structures, which Schwerblis is saying is already able to capture photons. So they won't come to the outside, but they will likely excite the overall shell, and you'll get an emission of probably much lower energy photons as this thing is interacting with the environment on the outside of the very small box. Okay? It's not a box, it's a sphere. It's just a euphemism for this structure, okay? Or a torus, or a capped tube, or the Vega Valley structures, okay? And likewise, if you had a very fast helium or a triton or whatever, and it's the product of two nucleon exchange reactions going on in here, and it's shot out in a direction, it doesn't matter which direction from any nuclear reaction within this sphere, it will come out and it will hit this coherent matter, this superconducting superfluid condensate that is the skin. This is the flower of life, but the 3D structure of it. And it will instantaneously consume it, just as the way that you can see that it instantaneously, non-thermally consumes the material that it is interacting with in many experiments. Be that John Hutchison's, I assume it would have been the case with Tesla. Tesla would have observed these ball lightning structures consuming things. Ball lightning can consume matter. It can go through large, thick brick walls, and the matter disappears. And this is exactly what happened with Martin Fleischmann, in my view, and Stanley Pons in their 1cc palladium deuterium system that ended up causing their singularity, where the material disappeared and it went through the table, the water disappeared, and it went through and into the concrete floor and left a fist-sized hole in there, and there was fragments of dust so small they could loft on just Brownian motion in the environment. And so I believe that that is exactly what's going on. This explains every single anomaly in LENR, and it's only when this thing blows up that you get to see the product. It's only when you see those Evo blaster structures blowing up in Henk Uren's, the first video on the first day that, or second video on the first day that we shared of Henk Uren's Vega experiment. When that blows up, it is spilling the guts of this structure, of the itonic mesh. This to me is something akin to the itonic mesh. Now, you can actually make a sphere of a wide range of different scales of these things. Let me go back to the presentation here. And is there anything else I want to talk about here? No, I think we're mostly done. Right, okay. Okay. Yeah. So essentially what we've talked about is material moving around these exotic vacuum objects. We know that these cluster, and I will show that in the next part of this presentation referring to Bagel experiments. But we know that they cluster like this. We know they cluster into very big clusters, because that's why we have this on the back wall from the Vega Valley experiment. This is all a cluster mesh, and we've seen what it does. It's this Maxwell superconducting superfluid lattice structure as predicted in Maxwell in the 1800s. And so that is what it's doing. So we've seen very, very big versions of this. And if it moves around, then if we have this structure, then I believe that a proportion of the matter that is consumed will be taken into the inside of this structure. This forces the structure to grow. By consuming the matter, it increases the scale of the coherent matter layer. I believe if there is nothing that breaks the stability of this structure, then it is scale invariant. This will work at black hole scales, it will work at sun scales, it will work at any scale. Now, you could have a very dense interior protected by a very coherent surface structure, and that potentially could be a model for a sun. Okay, you can't see into the sun, you only see the output of the sun. But when one of these flux loops goes a bit wonky and it throws out a prominence, then that could explain why you see all of these elements raining down. And let's say that it's the ion. Okay, I'm going to do it now. I wanted to say this for a long time, but I'm going to do it. So here we go. Let's say we have a prominence coming out, okay? And you get this coronal rain. What is happening, in my view, is that material from one of these magnetic flux loops that's gone a bit wonky is thrown up into the corona. And what it is the ion, which we know 100% is in this because we've seen it in our experiments, okay? It is what this coherent matter layer is made of. The ion goes up and it has absolutely zero electrons on it. And so it has to, this is the coronal temperature problem. The surface of the sun is what, 6,300 degrees centigrade or 6,700, whatever. It's not more than 7,000 degrees centigrade. The corona is meant to be at millions of degrees, okay? But it's assessed because of the spectrum of light that comes back, where you would have to have a black body at that temperature in order to create that spectrum of light. Okay, but what if your nuclei of iron in here is thrown up into the corona on a failed magnetic flux loop, and the nuclei of the iron, which has zero electrons, has to capture from the space around it and from the other plasma and whatever, all of the electrons it needs to reconstitute that iron atom, and all of those electrons fall through all of their shells. You will get the temperature of millions of degrees. This, I believe, is the way that the coronal temperature problem can be solved with exactly what we are witnessing in our experiment. Okay, you get iron elements. The element nuclei needs to regain all of its electrons. This is the cold electricity. It doesn't have to actually be hot at that point. It looks hot because of the photons that are coming out radiated from the corona. Okay, so that's that. And so we can move on to the next part of this presentation. But I'm going to put some hold music on here, and I'm going to go to the little boy's room. I will look quickly at your questions before we move on to the next part of this presentation. Enron Musk, that is just a fantastic name. I don't know who you are, but classy name. No, I didn't see it. I've enjoyed just a few moments of the Diamond Jubilee, and I wish the Queen every good fortune of health and so on. She's been an inspiration to many a British person. Yeah, Gordon, I believe that the ejection of mass could lead to synthesis of planetary bodies and so forth. Okay, so right, we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. It's not such a long section of the presentation. This is a Bagel experiment. So as an introduction to this, I will just show this hot off the press Henk Uren 1, 2, 3, 4 Tor left field shape test from today. Note that he defines in this video, which I will post on the MFMP's YouTube channel probably tomorrow, that his left is when the coil goes in here, he's looking at a left turn here, and then that goes left turn, and then that goes left turn. So actually Cosmic Dave's torus are, as far as I understand it, and he can confirm here, Cosmic Dave, he has a right and then a left. So could you confirm that, Cosmic Dave, is the case with your ball? And of course you have an iron core and Henk does not. Okay, so yeah. Let me just go and get the video on this. And so he has observed that he had a non-spherical field around this. And I'll just let this play. It's just, actually, I'll zoom through it, actually, because it'll be posted. Okay, so this is what people can do to map out their fields. And he's basically done what he did with the whiteboard. He's got a piece of chipboard here. And here's the coil with the tri-field, and he used this and he mapped out. But essentially, what he's describing here, and you'll see this, the left. He's using a variac here with the amplifier and so forth, and he's got his tri-field there. He's put it in there, and essentially he's mapped out this field map. And what it seems to be is it seems to be skewed over to one side, and he suspects that it's skewed over to one side because he has a corrugated metal roof, which you can see there. Okay, this is corrugated metal roof, and it happens to be kind of like more prone to one side than the other. Okay, so that may be real. The fact is that we know that ball lightning likes to get attracted to metals. We know exotic vacuum objects like to get attracted to metals. They are just a sea of bountiful electrons. So they want electrons, they feed off electrons, they need electrons to stay alive. And so, you know, it might be something that's real here. Okay. Now, I'm actually not going to be talking about some of the other experiments. There have been some excellent experiments, but I think probably we will have another session where people can talk about their various experiments. There is one thing that I want to put out there. There is a guy that has gone to the trouble of buying 700 ferrite cores. Now, we know from Cosmic Dave's work that it would appear that a ferrous-based core seems to be advantageous for this. And this guy actually went to the trouble of buying 700 ferrite core, very consistently made tori, which are effectively a torus of tori. Okay, so this is a second level tor. And these, I don't know, I need to check back with him to see. He didn't have time to build this into a torus, but he was willing to pass this forward to someone that was willing to do that. But really, it was quite an expensive thing, even though it was X stock. And so there is an opportunity for a very, very serious player to take this on board, potentially if he's not done it already himself. And he is suggesting these things can be wound in various configurations. So you can make we've already got a 2-level tour. This would be a 3-level tour, and this would be a 4-level tour. Okay, and you could arrange them even like this, and so forth. And so there are enough to do a range of different experiments in this. And this might be something that someone could do to build something like what I'm going to describe in this next section of the presentation, with some extremely precise and repeatable magnetic cord tours. So there we have it. It's kind of like the ferrite bit here is like the iron-rich wire that is in the center of Cosmic Daves, although it's a much larger piece of ferrite, and obviously the ferrite is designed to have this magnetic sort of property to it. So there we go. All right, so I think this is quite an opportunity. Now, what am I talking about here? I'm going to kill that. And I'm going to go here. And so what am I talking about? I'm talking about that we potentially don't have to get very complicated with our structure that I'm going to refer to here. This was caught after I did a presentation on Spark, initiation of excess energy and stuff, way back in 2018, and Juni Tuomela found this, and we published it on May the 2nd, from this video on May the 2nd, 2016, but this actual image and this blown up image was published on December the 14th, 2018. Subsequent to that, the National Research Nuclear University in Russia, in Moscow, published these long-lived plasmoid video type things where we have this toroidal. So this would almost certainly be fractal, but one could think of it as a second level tour, at least, like was produced by Ken Shoulders, and this was moving around, living for about 2 days. But what they also observed is these crystal structures of same. And when you look at this, it says here, the stream of electrons from the dielectric surface and complex object of type of luminous rings that is formed by it, rotating around its own common axis and rolling on the surface. A stream of particles, presumably electrons, which causes air to glow. A similar pattern is observed after emission of electrons from electron source or their injector through foil, is emitted from surface. This stream is formed into a set of several rings, 5 or 6, of the same diameter, which rotate around both their own and common axis, parallel to the plane horizontal. So this is a mobile cluster of exotic vacuum objects, and you know, maybe this is a couple of frames that are frozen together. I don't know, because they're describing 5 or 6. Or it formed into a several set of rings. So 5 or 6 set of rings. So is this a ring? I don't know. Or is this a ring? So 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. But I imagine that at the very least we've got, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, 7. And this is forming a kind of ball lightning like structure. And if that's the case, and we accept that ball lightning can negate the mass of and inertia of material by being inside the structure, and we know that ball lightning can transport material through other things, or it can cut holes through other things and end up by transporting material, then if this is a micro ball lightning and this is a substructure of a micro ball lightning, then we could potentially create a micro ball lightning macro thing from building out these kind of, if I can actually get the PDF up again. Where's my PDF gone? There we go. By taking these things and building some sort of structure, but rather than like this, it might be that we only need to look at 3-level tours. This would greatly simplify it. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can have all of the one type of pole pointing inwards, or one type of pole pointing outwards, or you could have alternating poles, like seems to be the case in some of the Vega Valley, or you can have them so that we're creating a macro scale version of what I am showing in this image, where these are fractal, but let's assume that the bare minimum you need to create a closed pointing vector is a 3-level tour. So if this is a 3-level tour, and this is a 3-level tour, and this is a 3-level tour, you can imagine how you could build a mesh by taking a 3-level tour like that, a 3-level tour like that, and off that side link one there, and just as long as you could get a big enough mesh to create something out of the minimum number of structures, to create something like this, which has been physically observed at the National Research Nuclear University. So how many 3-level tours would it need to create a kind of enclosed space, or 4-level tours pointing their poles in or out? I don't know, but I don't think it would be that many. Okay? Right. So so I'm proposing to create a minimalistic version of what I'm arguing is a ball lightning structure here out of these electromagnetic structures. Now, we know from the work of the international study that the bigger the structure is, the vastly lower level of charge separation and the magnetic flux in the loop is. We're looking for something that is a perceivable effect over time. And what could those perceivable effects be? Well, I've got a proposal for several items, and they are seed germination, time variation, beta or other decay rate, and mass variation. Okay, and so the first at the top here is seed germination. The very first recorded in modern times transmutation was in, I think, 1698, and it was in, I believe, seed germination. Okay, now Coherent, I think, Louis Coherent did these things in the 1950s, and people have attempted to replicate him since. They have found that some people got it, some people didn't. If you go to our Facebook page and you type in moon and potassium and calcium or seed germination, something like that, you will come across an article that I posted there many, many moons ago, which is referring to an Indian study that was done in 2013, where they started the germination of the seeds a couple of days interval throughout the year, and they found that in certain phases of the moon they got this anomalous change in potassium and calcium ratio between the dry weight of the seeds before and the dry weights of the seeds germinated afterwards. And so it would seem that there was some transmutation occurring, but it only occurred during certain moon phases. So this would imply that this would explain why some people did not get favorable outcomes with these type of seed germination studies, and other people did. Moreover, that at certain times of year, and this is well documented in Alexander Parkhomov's Space Earth Human, the sun, depending on which side of the planet you're in, whether you're in Australia or the Northern Hemisphere, in the respective summers, the organic life is in closer to the sun, and therefore it's coming more into the sun's neutrino sphere. This is relic neutrino sphere, and so the flux of relic neutrinos is higher, and so life can use this. As I've said, all living organisms, in my view, use this relic neutrino flux, and so it will accelerate their ability to make what elements they need from the elements that they have available in order to promote their growth. And so this is where you need to do controls, okay? So, and you need to grow these at the same time in the same phase as the moon to have any meaning to your data. But it could be that a 4-level tour with our seed pot growing in here, with the tour one way up and another one with the tour the other way up, but and then a control seed pot doing germination elsewhere, and then you would have to have a common water feed coming from a common nutrient source that feeds the same number of drips through a drip irrigation system. Those that are experienced with hydroponics might be better placed to do this. But you would not want to have some influence back through the systems. You wouldn't want to drip into one and drip into the other one, because you might be influencing the water and the amount of relic neutrino condensate that's in there. And so anyway, that being said, you would have to be in the same temperature environment, the same humidity environment, and so forth. So those experienced with hydroponics would probably be most experienced to do this kind of experiment, but they would need access to a tool. And this is where those that are experienced in tool building probably would be good to make those available for other people. And I would suggest that if there were serious players out there, if there was a way that we could come together to support production of tours and get those to people that have time to conduct experiments and that have various experiment expertise, that might be a good thing to facilitate. And so I would like to put that out there as an idea. Right. Time variation. So I would expect rather that seed germination may vary between different conditions of tour, and it might just be within a 4 tour. You can do that, or I would like to see ultimately what would happen in a bubble, right? And it might be that if the bubble was arranged in a certain way, rather than you could have it so that no relic neutrino flux was able to get inside, and therefore there would be very, very poor growth. Or you could maybe arrange 4 tours in a way that it was forcing an intense flux into the grow zone, and that you would have very highly accelerated growth. These are the 2 options. If the latter is true, you may be able to build devices that could promote healing, accelerated healing, and accelerated growth of everything you could want to accelerate growth for. And so this would be incredible technology for when we needed to occupy other planets in the solar system and beyond, and also incredible technology for potential healing. Okay, so then time variation. The second one here is with a 4 tour or with a spherical cluster in one of these 2 arrangements where nothing can get in, or where it's forcing material in. I would like to see mechanical. So the person doing this would want to have identical quartz-based clocks and identical mechanical clocks, right? We know piezo effects are affected by these type of technologies, and we know that mechanical things in the terms of Xu Wenju's sideways movement in his 1988 to 1999 work was affected by 3-body alignment. So and with the various configurations, I would like to see a digital wristwatch and a mechanical wristwatch, and 2 of those types separate. And actually, if you go and look there, I think what's his name? Kozrev did studies on time variation with what he was learning to understand was this flux, which he says drove the processes of the sun. And so I think Kozrev was very good at this. So they did timepiece studies. I do know that in the case of Dr. George Eagley, when he was visiting in the 1980s, these people doing spoon bending, these teenage boys in Israel, that he talked about time being distorted. And I know John Hutchison has found some time distortion when or has talked about this when he's doing his experiments. So it would be nice to have a device where these effects could be shown, because if it significantly shows a slowdown of time in this bubble, you could have a situation where you could park someone that has cancer in here, and the cancer would progress at a vastly slower rate whilst particular procedures or drugs became available for that person. If it was very extreme, the level of time reduction, you could end up in a scenario where you could freeze time and essentially extend your life for a very, 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 very long period of time. And I've argued that this may have been the approach that was used by the so-called Sumerian gods that were talked of in antiquity, that supposedly lived for very long years. And in fact, several of the old principal characters in the Old Testament supposedly lived for very long periods of time, and one wonders whether they had access to this technology for extending life or even healing. So, like I say, there's a potential for healing here, there's a potential for acceleration of growth, and there is potential for slowing down any random process. And on that note, we come to the next part, which is beta or other decay rate. We already know from the work of Takaaki Matsumoto, from the work of Takaaki Matsumoto, from Adamenko, from Ken Shoulders, from John Hutchison, and I haven't talked about this in any detail, and it will go into the book, and obviously from Yul Brown, that these systems are able to accelerate particularly beta decay, but in the case of Yul Brown and Takaaki Matsumoto and Adamenko, they are saying whatever the element is, they are able to convert it into other elements that are, how should we put this, they're stable elements. So that is forcing a decay to a stable element. Now, in the case of beta decay, you're accelerating a natural process by introducing a relic neutrino or a relic neutrino equivalent or condensates thereof in the form of string vortex solitons, and they are going in and they are manipulating the rate of decay, because when normally a beta decay occurs, you have too many neutrons there, and the neutron decays, sends out a beta particle, an electron, and an antineutrino. What happens in inverse beta decay, you bring in your cold neutrino or your relic neutrino, and it comes in, and the relic neutrino or cold neutrino annihilates the antineutrino, and then the antineutrino is not able there to bind the electron, and the electron comes out, and you have this forced stabilization function. So this isn't, in this case, this isn't about completely changing the matter into completely other stable elements. This is about accelerating the process of time. And this was observed without understanding why by Xu Wenju during 1988 to 1999 work, where he took radioisotope-driven atomic clocks using cesium-137 and rubidium-87 and forcing the decay of those, or seeing a change in the rate of decay during this three-body alignment. I believe that this might be a path to that, and I would like to see an experiment where we had either a 4-tall bagel with this in, or we had a spherical cluster of the various types that I've been intimating here, and we put that in there and we see if the rate of decays goes up, and by looking at the different energies of the particular decays that goes up, we would know which isotopes of which elements in this material were changing their rate of decay. So that would be an interesting experiment. Now, you might have to let it sit there running for a number of months. It might be that you only get on the timepieces, you might only get a couple of seconds a month, right? But you know, that could be significant, especially if you could repeat it, like every time the clock inside the thing either went faster or slower, depending on the configuration of the bagels. And it would be very, very interesting, and that would point, you would only need to know that every time you did it with this configuration, it went faster or slower. You would only need to know that to then have a certain knowledge that if you worked in that direction, you would either potentially be able to slow time down or accelerate time or accelerate cell division or something. And to understand what may be possible to change, I would suggest you go and read the work of Simon Schnoll. Simon Schnoll had this book where he studied things from 1950 all the way through to 2012, and in here he suggests that in all random processes, whether that's a decay of an element or the division of a cell in biology, every single random process in nature is affected by this common genic factor and this active agent which comes in from the cosmos, and I think that that is exactly what we will be able to be manipulating the rate of flux of by using these systems. And then the last one here is mass variation with bismuth and water. Now I've suggested bismuth and water because water was is diamagnetic, and bismuth is basically the most diamagnetic element there is. Water is obviously a lot easier to obtain than bismuth for average people, and so what I would like to suggest is that we have various coil structures, and if we can get the structure that I'm referring to in the this one here, if we can get this, or we can create a cluster that's similar to what might be going on with the work of Bogdanovich, or a variation thereof, and inside here you would put your bismuth or your sphere of water, and you would hang the whole material on a gantry and a wire, and you would energize the structure and see if you had a change in mass of the overall total structure. And when people are doing so-called anti-gravity research, or as I like to refer to it as negating the effect of the action of gravity, then you're often looking for micrograms, and so bismuth is nice and heavy, and so that reduces your or increases your signal to noise ratio, and likewise with the decay, it's worth looking at Space Earth Human, where Alexander Parkhomov used sheets of aluminium to remove the noise that you get from all of the normal beta decay from an element, and so you just see the maximum decay, because what you get from an inverse beta decay is the maximum energy beta always. It's monochromatic, so you can vastly increase your signal to noise ratio. And so anyone that wants to try those experiments, I could advise on what they would need to do to increase their signal to noise ratio. But of course, if you're using water, that's going to be less weight, and so the potential effect would not necessarily be as much as a piece of bismuth, but it's certainly easier to get hold of. And so that is the kind of experiment that I would like to see. So does anyone have any comments on these suggestions? Does anyone have any other comments? So David Boutilliers, I'm on the bismuth one. Absolutely fantastic, David. Okay, already working on it with a third order tour. Yeah, I think the third order tour, as I said, is enough. I think if you mesh them, if you get many of them and you mesh them like that, you will effectively create a macro fourth order tour. But you could link them together into like a fairly flexible arrangement of meshes, and then potentially create the gravity reduction in there. Actually, the other thing that I would probably add to this is crystallization. So I'm going to add that in there. So try and replicate the, let me find the right slide here. The lead tin alloy that was observed crystallizing in an odd way. And in fact, once you've actually established a configuration that works for one type of these processes, it'll probably be something that works for the other type as well, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to manipulate the structure of the physical vacuum. This is vacuum engineering. So if you're increasing the density of the thing that is the physical vacuum structure, or you're decreasing it, knowing that in one circumstance would be equivalent to the others. And we know that this will be true because the three body alignments of Maurice Allais in 1954, whenever it was, when he saw the change in the Foucault pendulum, and the spectral lines changing, the crystallization of metals changing, the radioisotopes, beta isotopes changing, and the sideways force,
all of these were affected by the exact same thing, the three-body alignment. So whoever gets data pointing that this configuration moves in this direction and the opposite configuration or a variation of it moves in the other direction, this will be applicable to the other things that we are talking about. So it's not just about crystallization, it's about the when they had the crystallization in the 1980s, 1990s with the three-body alignments, under the three-body alignment you got linear crystals forming, and when it wasn't, they were more disordered, and so that is it. And if you think about it, crystallization is a process of where electrons are organizing matter around them. This follows that if your biology is trying to, which must use electrons in all chemical processes, is able to more efficiently organize the matter around it, or less efficiently organize the matter around it in the case of cancer, then if that's the case, then it will cause the how should we say, the slowing of the growth in one way, or the acceleration of the growth. And we must know what does what, because you don't want to give someone who's got cancer an acceleration field. You want a deceleration field. And I'm reminded of when I visited Piantelli's magnet-driven low frequency using 50 hertz AC magnetic field. And I've shared this picture before. It was actually a coil that was about the size of my torso, very, very thick, driven by three-phase, and it was effective, he said, and there were many testimonies, in curing cancer that couldn't be cured by any other means. And could it be that he was creating an intense relic neutrino flux, or removing a relic neutrino flux, such that it was preventing the growth of the cancer, or decelerating the growth of the cancer? It was like maybe sucking it all out of there. And so the body then, which, you know, if you're dealing with the cancer in the body here, but the things that fight the cancer are produced in your femurs, they can then produce more of the white blood cells or whatever that come in and kill off the cancerous cells, because the cancer cells are slowed down. Or conversely, if you were to treat the bone marrow with an acceleration process, where it could produce a lot more white blood cells, you're back to this story where in Dubna they found that fluxes of strange radiation caused the higher production of white blood cells, and then if they were then exposed to gamma rays that then would lead to cancer, the mice and rats didn't progress to have more cancers, or they had a reduced amount of cancers than ordinarily without the pre-treatment beforehand. And they found that it was stimulating the production of white blood cells. If you do it the other way around, where you gave them the gamma rays first, and then you caused them to have an acceleration of this relic neutrino flux, this caused the acceleration of the cancers. So by topical application, if you say, for instance, had a lung cancer or a brain cancer or a throat cancer or those kind of areas of the body, and then you gave the relic neutrino flux to, or the strange radiation flux, or rather this strange radiation is more a damaging packet, but if you gave a more intense flux of the coherent condensate of the cosmos to the bone marrow specifically, you could potentially create more of the material that would then go on to heal areas of the body using the natural capability of the body. So you're basically putting nitrous oxide into the health workers. They get to hospital faster, and they can do their job and get home faster and get rest. So you kind of think of it a bit like that. You tried to call me. No, I'm on the live stream. My darling wife is in Vietnam, so. Right. So I've added here the metal crystallization because I think that's a good one that we can test in this. Did anyone else have any ideas? I'm going to deal with bug wings, and I've got a lot of data to deal with Grebennikov. Would love melting point bismuth alloys be? I think the lead tin alloy, because you already have a data set from Xu and Ju. Okay, so I'm going to go to the final part of this presentation, which is findings from the analysis this week. And this is going to be a little bit more raw, but I'm going to have some context for it. Okay. So we started with you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just get what you need. And that was referring to the not necessarily getting to present the really, I believe, valuable work that the project has done since we were last able to present at an ICCF. And what I've learned in this process is that if you just go ahead and do what you can do rather than worrying about what you're not allowed to do or can't do, you just do what you find out that's exactly what you need. So in this particular thing, we had this split plane and it was not very highly resolved. And so unlike a lot of my work where I've seen something, I've thought about it again, and I've tried to go back and see if there's any truth in that. This was very raw, and that's what I'm doing, and this is just get it out there and publish and be damned. Anyway, so this is what we saw. And sometimes I was taught this actually in military training, where if you were looking at a landscape, you can often not see anything of any importance. And the reason is because your fovea is focusing on somewhere, and that takes a lot of your brain processing power to focus on that particular area. And the rest of your vision is just giving you an impression of what's around that focal point. And so you miss things that are actually significant in the vista. And so I was trained to do this thing, and I called it the visual blur scan, where you actually defocus your eyes so that you don't see anything with high detail. And what happens is things of significance just suddenly pop out, because what happens is your brain tries to look for changes in the environment rather than focusing on the beautiful detail in one particular spot. And that's a mosquito, and I don't want that to bite me. One thing you learnt in India was how to kill mosquitoes. Don't ever try and slap your hands, because the air pressure forces the mosquito out of between your hands. What you do is you grab it like that, and then you don't have the pressure pulse, and it doesn't force the mosquito out of your hand. So that's just for those people that don't like getting bit. Right. Okay, so you can actually do this by, let's say you've got some nice sun tomorrow, and you happen to have a lunch break from work or whatever you're doing. Go out into the garden and look around you in focus and see if you can see anything of real significance that catches your eye. and then say, look at the ground and look at the ground. And then what you do is you blur your eyes. You just blur your eyes. And I'm pretty sure that if you're like me, suddenly things like ants and insects will pop out because they are the things that are moving. And your perception is not focused on detail, it's focused on changing in the environment. And so, yeah, I was trained to do that in the military, and it saved me a lot of problems sometimes. Okay. Okay, so why am I telling you this? It's because sometimes when you're at a low resolution, it can tell you a story which may or may not be true, but it gets the message across. So when we were looking at this before, it looked like we had something burrowing in here, and that this was the thing that was burrowing in here, and it had a central zone, and it was kind of digging its way under here, and that is the impression that it gave. Okay, and we will find out whether that's actually what happened when we move forward. But let's look, and so this is the whole frame itself. If I go here, this is the whole frame, and so I talked about this paper earlier about the fact that when they simulated this thing, it's 21st of the 4th, 2021, Yu et al., and it was sponsored by everyone all around the world. And they found that if they fired a laser into a non-homogeneous or non-linear plasma, they would get a torus forming. And the torus, you can see on the outside here, has a polygonal outside and a dense thing in the middle. But if you look at the vortical flow around the outside, you've got the intense vortex on the outside here. But you also have, if this is coming around here, you can imagine that this is a vortex that's kind of going in the other direction. So you have a vortex this way and you have a vortex that way. And if you were to slice across this, you have a big vortex that goes out this way, and you have another vortex that goes counter-rotating on the inside. Okay, but then you have the flux going through the middle, and you have this dome. And you could imagine that something similar could be going on here, where you have a big vortex, and then you have a little vortex, but the little vortex is actually as a result of the big vortex. Okay. Now, by vortex, it could be one of these toroidal structures that is moving things around it, but it itself is not moving. Okay. And so you can imagine that this might be occurring with our toroidal structure that I've got here, and it produces this pseudomagnetic monopole. This is in the work of Bogdanovich, and this is the work in Perovchikov, and I've shared other people. And I've spoken about this in the case of other types of soliton structures. This one here, you can see the soliton very clearly in this smoke ring, and you can see how the material is pulled up through the center, and it is literally the dead center here. So if this is rotating around here, you can imagine, according to that plasma one, there's a little bit that's rotating, counter-rotating, and is that what's kicking this bit out here? Is it kicking this bit out here? Anyway, there's this intense flux coming through the middle, and we observe this here, where we have this toroidal structure here, and it sucks things in a beam, and this is, I've argued, the disruptive beam of Podkletnov, and also to a certain degree in Hutchison. And then it comes up to here, and then immediately goes off to the side. So it has a very sort of flat top. It goes down to the side, and so you can imagine that there's this structure here. And if we go back to this one, it has this counter-rotating vortex here. So vortex, counter-rotating vortex. Things get chucked out about down here, but there's still this focus through the dead center. Okay, so this is white and this is black. So you would imply that it's going. This is see the intensity here, and you've got this ring spot here and this kind of secondary ring spot here. Okay, do we get that? Do we get that? Okay. All right, and then in theory it says here that the magnetic field is 1.36 times 10 to the 3 Tesla. This is 1.36 thousand Tesla. Okay, that's quite a lot of field. And we looked at this work and we found that the charge separation on these rings could be 3.6 trillion volts. Okay. This is a laser cut through, and again, these are all the links to the resources. So this is kind of like this, but with a green laser, so you can see the substructure. And here you can see the intensity here of the density of the smoke particles that are trapped in here. You can see how flat this is, but you can also see how it comes down here, and it's kind of like it's domed, but it's actually, it has this kind of depressurization. And I've argued that in a propulsion sense, this is depressurizing the physical vacuum in front and pushing it off to the side. But in a less effective way than I think these spheres and tic-tac shapes would do. But this would be a method by which some of the propulsion systems work. And so you've got this vortex coming in here. It's not so clear on this one that there's a counter-rotating vortex here. It kind of suggests there may be here, but you could consider that this is coming in. But if it's coming in, then why would it come out and then kind of circle around like that? I don't know. Okay. And before we move forward, I have to show this, and it's not necessarily clear, but this is the outside edge of a large ball lightning that occurred on the exposure of a 10 yen coin in Japan by a Masa gas. And it has scallops. It has another scallop here, and it has a series of scallops. And you can see around this scallop ridge, you have affected area, affected area, affected area, affected area. So you have regular affected areas around a scallop section. Maybe in this next, this is actually a video, so you can maybe get an idea of this scalloping that's going on here. The scalloping. And we saw the same thing in the ball burn circular structure in 1986 sample from John Hutchison. I'm not going to show that. I showed that in the last presentation. But essentially, in the sphere that was taken out of the steel, there were these scallop sections. Okay, you can see it here in the top left hand corner rather. Here. You can see this scallop section here, And I didn't really know what these were when I saw it, but I knew it possibly could be significant. This is the snowballs on cobblestones, where the microball lightning, which looks like it had persisted after the experiment, had taken the oxygen off the copper oxide and converted it into Cu2, two oxygens into sulfur, which we can see here on these, what I call miners. Of course, I would call them miners, wouldn't I? And so these are the scallop sections. So I want you to hold these scallop sections, and also the kind of like, this is copper, and we saw copper being consumed by the ball lightning in Henk Uren's experiment. But you can see it's kind of smooth. It's kind of like sloshed. It's the way it's eating it. But it's these scallops that I really want to focus on here. And now we're going to go to the data that I haven't processed. I'm just going to show you the slides, show you the pictures. So I need to go to the directory. Okay. So I'm gonna start with the data for the original structure that we looked at last week. So I need to find it on my hard drive. Give me a second. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. So, to do this, I woke up at 4 a.m. I travelled all the way to Prague, out from Prague into the suburb of where we were seeing the exhibition centre. I'd registered, I went into the exhibition. I had 1 hour and 10 minutes to use the SEM. I went straight there, looked at the SEM, used it, and then I hightailed it back because I had to pick my kid up from school. So it was a horrible day, but I think we got something very, very valuable. So here is the image of the area under question in ludicrous detail. And here it is. And so around this area here, you can see the fracture planes with these glassy-like fissures on. And then in this structure here, which was supposedly where our miner was, firstly, it doesn't look like there's a toroidal structure in there. However, it does look like there's a wave-like smooth consumption or editing of the or cutting of the material. So it isn't these straight brittle fracture lines. It is, and look, you can see all the brittle kind of nature of the fractures over here, and the brittle nature here, and the brittle nature here, and the brittle nature here. Wherever it was that came in here, there is this kind of gloopy kind of change to the material. Okay, this is where I'm saying you don't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Well, I didn't get quite what I wanted here. You can see these weird kind of structures that we see on this cupric oxide here, on this boundary layer, which potentially was influenced. But this potentially was a phantom, or it burrowed in this far and then went off in a different direction, and maybe the direction it went off in ended up by splitting this plane here. Okay, splitting this plane. Okay, this is with a different look at it. This is using the BSD. Okay, again you see these weird kind of zonal areas. Is this some kind of magnetic influence in here? Is it because it's glassy and it's just reflecting the electron beam or the X-rays that are coming back? Don't know. But this wasn't the slam dunk that I had hoped for, because I was hoping to see a solid structure in here. And in fact, what all you see is something that if we zoom this like right out, maybe if I can zoom this out, you can start to see the shadow, and this is where you get the blur image, right? Right here, when it's really small, you can see the toroidal structure here with the center point. Okay, you can see the toroidal structure here. But what you are looking at is the shape that is left, not the actual shape of what you're seeing here. This is the toroidal structure with the centerpiece here, but it's not so slam dunk. However, that wasn't all we found. So just for reference, that was in this part of the Lion reactor. So it was on this broken split plane on this cupric oxide crust. And I will share the video from the live session. Okay. So I will go to Photoshop for this. So a little bit down the line on the area which is above the bolt, we observed this. Which I will get the right window up. Which is our title slide. Okay. So it's this structure here. And when I saw this, I thought, well, I think I know what that looks like. It looks like this. This is the Perovskov. And no, it's because this is a thing that's spinning the material around it, you always kind of end up with one of the tails a little bit longer. And this is the key to all occult knowledge, all hidden knowledge, occult meaning hidden, as per the Egyptians. When I was talking about the potentially 12,000-year-old libation disc, which is the Ankh, and this is the key, the lower part of the Ankh. Okay, and so you have two vortices. This big vortex on the outside, and then the little vortex on the inside. Now, the little vortex on the inside is the one that I have always showed in my presentations, I believe. And this jury's still out on this, but when I'm showing this, I'm talking about the intense vortex on the middle, which is actually not the main vortex, it would seem. There's a bigger vortex out here, and that might be the primary vortex, but it creates a smaller vortex inside, which is kind of counter-rotating, okay? As we can see from this plasma work here, the internationally funded supercomputer simulated, work. So you have the big vortex, which is the main vortex here, where the actual action occurs. But then there's another kind of vortex in the middle here, and it produces this dome structure, which we kind of seeing here, and it's in all these other toroidal vortex structures. These dome with a kind of depressurization zone, this dome here with this focused beam behind. So that's what you're seeing here. This dome with the focused beam here behind in the center. Okay, so let me go back to the Photoshop here. And so I'm suggesting that this is functionally equivalent. Now, this disruption beam that's coming down here, this might be under the surface here. It might be under the surface. Now, it's not actually got right. There we go. And the other thing is I have said that some people cannot see the wood for the trees. I know that because sometimes I've looked at something and I haven't seen the wood for the trees. So I know it happens. It happens to me all of the time, actually. But when I saw this structure that you are looking at here, I thought, I can't believe I didn't look for this sooner. Now, bearing in mind, I had no access to an SEM to look at the line reactor that had the right chamber size and capabilities and would allow me to put it in since February 2018. Okay, so this was the first time I had a chance to look at this, and I only went to Prague to look at the other thing. So I didn't get what I needed there. Oh, sorry, get what I wanted, or what I thought I had, which was the aftermath structure and the track that it caused. But I think I got a lot more from this, and I think I'm going to show you what, because it's really rather special. So I then zoomed into this particular structure, and it looks like this. Give me a second. I need to find it in here. Okay. Okay. So actually, before I do that, I just want to point something out. Right. So this is on the image I've just showed you. Now, I want to point something out. Here on the top, we have fractured material, broken and fractured material. This is the CuO, cuprous oxide, on the outside. This is the cupric oxide, Cu2O. Okay? And down in here, look what we have down in this area. We have this sloshed material, which is kind of like melted and gloopy, okay? But it's even more clear on this side. And on this side, we have our scallops, okay? This is all gloopy. You come up to the top here and it's all fracturing. It's all fracturing on the top here. But as we go down onto the inside here, we have this circular section, and scallops in this plane, and scallops in this plane, and scallops in this plane. And it's all gloopy. Yeah? Down into the hole. And then what struck me is this structure here. And also I wanted to look at the elements. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a little bit of what's going on in here. And this is the major torus that I have been showing in my presentations, but now I realize it's actually the minor torus. It's kind of like, but maybe not. Maybe this is the major torus, and because this is spinning around fast, it's actually causing a vortex that goes that way. Okay, we know, and we've shown this before in many pieces of data, that this is this intense vortex here. You have a counter-rotating vortex here, and we've seen in a proton flare from I think the European Space Agency, the exact same structure where one is one magnetic pole and the other one is the other magnetic pole, implying that it's moving material that is related to magnetism through one way, and it's moving it through the other way. So I would argue that still the major vortex is here, and that this is the minor vortex, although this is bigger and it seems to have done a more hole. And I will show my reasoning for that in a second. Okay, so I have actually quite a bit more to show on this, but I've zoomed into this side over here. So let me just get that image up. Okay. So I actually have a more in focus on the top plane here, but I quite like this image because it's in focus in the back area, and so you can see more of these kind of gloopy kind of wavelet type structures coming out of here, and then it comes to this more fractured area up here. Now it appears that there's some sort of material here which is not the same as the cuprous oxide and not the same as the cupric oxide. And then there's definitely something going on here in this area where I suggest there is the intense vortex going on, which is the counter-rotating vortex to the one over here. But when I looked at this, I was absolutely struck, and I kicked myself, because for years I had said that these things that I saw on the inside of the quartz had to have come from the inside of the reactor. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about something happened on the inside of this alumina ceramic tube here, this ceramic tube. And at the end of where this iron bolt is here, there is an end, and this is where I believe the magnetic clusters are most likely to form. And then when it goes through the iron Curie point, they get released. Okay, and then it goes through the copper, and then through the copper. So it has to go through. It has to basically come from the center where the diapads are. These are nickel discs which have synthetic diamonds in there, which are almost entirely carbon, but a little bit of nitrogen. And that is where the EVOs are forming in the reactor. And they are coming through the alumina and whatever the ceramic is, coming through. And then they are going through the copper, and then they're getting stuck on the inside of this fused quartz here and leaving a mark. And that is what I have said since the first time I shared this. But when I looked at this particular image you see on the screen here, this one right here, I said to myself, I've seen that shape before. I know what that shape is. That shape is this shape. It's this shape where you have this smaller vortex with this intense white splodge in the middle here, and this larger vortex. Okay? Now, in this, with my logic, this would imply that these are both rotating in the same direction. And it looks like material is being sucked up through the center, and it's very straight, this edge. Look at that edge, it's straight. And then it kicks out, goes over, round, and down. Okay? Goes straight through the center, immediately changes direction, like here, and then goes round, down, and round. So what is that showing you? That, in my view, is showing you this. Material is coming straight up here, around here, and out and down and round. That is the same as we have seen. And that implies that if this is, and I've got an overlay here, this is the core of this part of the vortex, and this is the core of the other one. It all wonderfully lines up. The carbon deposits around the ridge wonderfully line up. What we are looking at is the exotic vacuum object that came through. This is orthogonal to the so perpendicular to the surface. So the torus is coming around here and going in here, or going around here and coming in here. This is possibly one of the substructures that's interacting, and it's leaving this carbon eyeliner here, which you can see is in this area here, okay? And there's this central spot here. Now, if I was to suspect that there was a lot of carbon, it would be here. Now, I'm pretty much sure I can see that that's the case because this is black and grey. Okay. Wow. Thanks, guys. That's a fantastic. That's 3 and 4. The third and fourth super chat. So really, thank you there. So here now, if I overlay this one again, you can see that this one maybe, many of these feature structures line up. But I have done the elemental maps. I haven't done all of them in this particular composite. You can see here, this is the BSD. This shows you the elemental arrangement. And this shows you more of the physical arrangement. So you can really get an idea of the depth of this burrowing down in here. And you can see the fracturing on here. And you can see the gloopiness in the center here. But you can also see this beam of stuff that's coming up here. And this stuff which is very clearly different from the other material around it. And I'm going to overlay now the carbon detection. And there it is. That is the carbon detection. If I remove the background, we almost have a triangle here with a structure here, a structure here, and a structure here. Okay? That is overlaying here. That's the carbon. I didn't do the map over here, and we actually look at the elements in here, and we'll refer that back to Solin's work. Okay, but there's also a sort of substructure over here, which is also carbon rich, and it exactly lines up. Okay, of course it's a map of this thing, so you can see here again. Now, if we overlay that on here, this three-winged structure, which is very similar to the three-winged structure we see when we do ultra experiments, it's centered around this bright white spot here. Centered around that bright white spot. Okay? So I couldn't believe that I had seen this structure and shared this structure since February 2018, and it helped form so much of my understanding. And here it is. It's one side of this particular thing. If I bring it up again, where is it? Window. It's one side of this structure. Okay, which is the vortex structure, and that is where the core. I think this is it. This is where the core vortex is, and the bigger vortex is on the outside. Okay, this is the core vortex, and this is because it's spinning around like this. It causes a different vortex. I don't know, but there's definitely two segments to this. And if we look at the European Space Agency image of the sun, which I've shared before, one has a pole going one way, so it's two tori effectively, but one is the real one and one is the induced one, and that they will have a flux going one way and a flux going the other way. Okay. So just to go over that again, this is our structure, and then I'm going to go and look at the map data and the SEM data for this. So if you give me a second, I will do that. And like I say, the raw video of the capture of this will be published tomorrow or the next day. Okay. So thank you, Daniel and Corky, specifically for your support there. It's really great. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the Word file here. Okay, so first up, I'm going to look at some of the material around here. So I'm going to look at some of these areas here to see what elements we see. And in this little fragment here that's been spat out to the side, we see carbon, which we have from the core. Right? Nitrogen that we have in the air, but also we have nitrogen in the core. Oxygen, which we have in the core because we had D2O. Sodium, aluminium, silicon, sulfur, chlorine, potassium, and copper, obviously, we have in the core. in the metal that it's burrowing through. Okay. Now, mostly it's carbon. 54% of the atoms are carbon. Okay. But then the Evo was born in the core. Okay. Oxygen was in the core. So that's that. That is what we are seeing in this fragment here. Let's see what we see in the next fragment. So in this next fragment, we are looking actually at this piece here. Okay. That's potentially part of this second vortex. And what do we see? Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. Carbon is nearly 50% again, nitrogen and oxygen. And so between those, that's almost all of it. But sodium, aluminium. Now, aluminium oxide is in the tube that is surrounding in the core. So this is definitely partly aluminium oxide. Okay. So in theory, it passed through there and may have captured the aluminium from that. Sulfur, we know, and we showed that in the snowballs on cobblestones, is 2 oxygens fused, and we got oxygen from the core. Chlorine is another typical element synthesized. Potassium. Nickel. Well, that's an interesting thing. We have nickel here. It's not a lot, but we have nickel. Okay. I have shared in the original, in where we showed the flux loop, and I can bring that up now. In fact, I'll bring that up now for thoroughness. That the, I need to change this one here to the wire used in Lion here is this one, and this is Cantal. And Cantal is iron, chrome, and aluminium. And there's a vortex flux loop that's on the outside, and it came over and deposited some material on the top here. This is what the deposit looked like. And when we zoom into that deposit, what do we see? We see iron, chromium, aluminium. There was carbon in the core. There was oxygen in the core. There's silicon dioxide in the quartz. And there's calcium here. What I'm trying to say is that there is no nickel in this wire. Okay? The reactor has a ceramic with no nickel in it. It has copper with no nickel in it, silicon dioxide with no nickel in it, and an alumina foam with no nickel in it, and a heater wire that has no nickel in it. What has nickel? What has nickel? What could have produced the nickel signal that we see here? What could have produced it? Well, it's coming from the core. It's coming from the nickel diapad that is in the core of the reactor. This is a telltale sign that this overall structure had teleported material from the center to the outside. Let's see if we see any other data. Okay, so this is where I'm starting to map it. It's not the best map, but look at this. In this map area where we have this key structure here, this main torus, the more intense torus, it's got not just this itty bitty bit of nickel here, this 0.17, which you could maybe dismiss. It actually has 2.4% of the weight of this area here is nickel. Okay? It's carbon, oxygen. Carbon's in the diamonds in the core. Oxygen's in the water. It's in the alumina, aluminium oxide. It's in all kinds of things that the exotic vacuum object would have traveled through. Copper is in the material it's just burrowed through, but nickel is only in the core of the core. Okay? And bearing in mind, this didn't go through the silicon dioxide, didn't even get to the outside. This is what left the marks on the inside of the quartz tube. Going in further and doing a closer look, we have this 3-winged structure that we have seen in ultra experiments many, many times. Okay? It also has this kind of 2 spots in the center, but we won't dwell on that. There's this the vortical type structure with the oxygen there, but oxygen's everywhere. But anyway, here we've got the nickel, and the nickel is mostly focused into the structure here. The most dense nickel is in this structure here. We've got a little blob down here and a little blob here and this blob over here. Okay, this is most of the nickel that represents that 2 point whatever percent it was is in this cutter. This is coming through here, and here is our copper. Obviously it's everywhere, and that was that. And I went in and looked even closer here. So this is with a higher resolution here. I actually went in at higher resolution. And in this assessment with more sample points, it sees 3.5% of the weight of this overall structure. Given the fact that this technology likes to make carbon and oxygen, right? And it already has copper there. This is a surprisingly high level of nickel that I believe was transported from the core. And if you remember the diapads in the core, they were actually damaged. Okay. So that's essentially, is there any more in there? I've got the images here. So we're looking in close at this. So we've got a finer resolution here on this two spot central structure. And then this 3-winged, this is at 120 degrees, okay? With substructures on the outsides. There we go. The predominance of the nickel is in this zone of effect, with a few fragments around the outside. And this is really churned up. It just looks disrupted, let's say. And that's the structure. So I went looking for a miner that had broken part of the copper. What I got was exactly what I need. Exactly what I need. This is the overall structure, two sides. This is one is the Eye of Horus, one is the Eye of Ra. Okay, and it is the shape. It is the same shape as things that are planetary scale on the sun, captured as proton flares, i.e., they are ejecting protons. Well, could it be that in the center of this structure, where it is influencing matter to such a high degree that out of the center of this area, it's ejecting protons in the scale that the sun's working at? Because we know Lena does produce proton beams, because that is the whole basis behind Piantelli's theory about how his reactor works. And other observers have observed the production of hydrogen. What did Solin say is produced in his experiments? What did he say was produced in his experiments? Well, we can't see the helium. We saw particularly carbon, yes. We saw nitrogen, yes, and oxygen. So the first three there we saw in abundance. We saw potassium. We didn't see calcium in this, but we did see it in the toroidal structure that hit the wire. Did we see sodium? I can't remember. Yes, I think we did. Aluminium. Didn't see magnesium. I think we saw silicon and iron. Okay, or maybe we didn't see iron in this particular case. Let me just go back there. Like I say, this is very raw. Just getting it out to you when I can. What do we see in the elements synthesized up here? Potassium, chlorine, sulfur. Okay, so anyway, the main ones: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. You got the sodium there. Okay, but like I say, some of these can be captured. Shishkin established this will capture atoms as it goes through material, and clearly that, I believe, is what exactly we are seeing here. And so there we have it. So I didn't get what I wanted, but I got absolutely exactly what I needed. Exactly. I said the very first presentation that the Lion reactor would be one of the most important experiments. I didn't give a time. I've said this before. I didn't give a time because the data in it was so significant. It was much later that I realized that Solin had seen all of these things before. But the level of preciseness of the structures that are causing Lena in this experiment, and particularly in this piece of data here, and its correlation through to things that are on planetary scales, the size of the sun, scale invariant, and it is both transporting material and, it would appear, transmuting material. This is again, the argument I was talking about, some of the presenter at ICCF that's talking about, you know, is this actual contamination? Is it transmutation, or is it transportation? Well, you don't need to see that presentation because you just need to listen to Ken Shoulders or know what John Hutchison did, and you are seeing it here. You are seeing it here on this image. Transmutation with these vortex nature structures that are able to bore, as we know, Ken Shoulders proved, through ceramics and other materials, and it would appear that it's consumed this material, and it left the mark on the outside of the quartz, which we have here, and the main structure is this structure here. So with that, I think that concludes the presentation. Let me just check I did everything. I may have to forego a review tonight, which is unfortunate, but I have to wake up at 5 hours from now to do something else. So I might have to ask you to forgive me. But we talked about ICCF until everyone was bored with tears. We talked about the possible explanation for eruptions in coherent matter transmutations, and also I gave my understanding of why you don't see the required for, in order to publish in fusion technology, transmutation products in the right levels of abundance, and why you don't see gamma rays and X-rays that one would expect, but particularly gamma rays. And I think that's all because of the coherent matter that does the transmutation, and the whole theory is consistent with explaining all of the observations from observations that were used to derive the structure that explains all the observations. Then I talked about a whole load of Bagel experiments where we can employ on a more subtle level this vacuum engineering process, and if one or more of the configurations are proven to do one or more of the effects, we know from Xu Wenju's work that all of the other effects will fall into place. And probably be related to that. And I talked about how this is very similar to the work of Piantelli, who discovered the nickel hydrogen system, and it is his passion for healing, and particularly he's healed cancer, but he has healed other things, and this implies to me that this is the same kind of process going on. And I think that when we combine the work of Shishkin with the work of Piantelli, we can know how we can both improve accelerated healing without or lowering and also lowering the risk of potentially accelerating things like cancer and so forth. And then findings from the 2nd of June 2022 SEM EDS session, which for me was absolutely what I needed to kind of wrap up what's going on at such an incredible level of fidelity. I couldn't have asked for something more that would describe this. You know, the material is flying through the center and it's coming out round the sides. Okay, it is what it is. I'm sorry, get used to it. That's what it is. It's going to do the same thing every single time. And by the way, this is the same as those Sumerian lamps that we have seen before. And you know, I'm going to bring that Sumerian lamp up. Why not? Let's bring the Sumerian lamp up. No, I'll leave it. I'll leave it for today. Otherwise, I'll think. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions for us, me to respond to. And if not, I will go back to slide 1 and say, you can't always get what you want. But if you are absolutely relentless, you might get what you need. So is it a form of cold fusion? It's all of that, all of the above. So what's the process to heal what kind of cancer? So a flux of string vortex solitons derived from exploding metal foils passed into rats in Dubna in the Shishkin et al. Work showed that it would stimulate the production of white blood cells, that when the animal was subsequently exposed to gamma rays and got cancers, the progression of the cancers was reduced because they had more white blood cells. If you did the reverse and it gave them the gamma pulse first so that they already had cancer, and then you gave them exposure to the string vortex soliton, these condensed relic neutrino flux, this would accelerate the cancers. And this is very similar to what was said by David Hudson. If you took ormus before you got cancer, you were less likely to get cancer. If you took ormus after you got cancer, it would accelerate the cancer. So I think they're functionally equivalent, although I think ormus to a certain degree is a self-harvesting, it's because of the structure, it's effectively like an EVO. And so it is able to condense relic neutrino condensate, and even before it's consumed, it will be doing that. So it will have a higher density of relic neutrino in there, and so that's why you have the same kind of effects as observed by exposing the flux. So I think what this will allow is trillions of dollars worth of technology for promoting healing and dealing with ailments, but also for accelerating plant growth, germination, where it's so important that early years of any organism is so important to the future and the lifespan and the reproductive capability, the amount of yield you get from seeds. It's so important, those early stages of growth, to the future and the capability of an organism. And so if this is able to do what it would suggest the promise of it is, then if it's used in the right way, then it could really seriously impact food production rates, health and longevity, and all kinds of manner of things. Could you briefly describe the reactor? I can't. Essentially, it's. Do I have it up here? Yeah. So by January 2013, I'd come to the conclusion that industrial abrasives were probably a good technology to use, and I suggested nickel diamond or nickel boron nitride, and that I put that out there into this space for people to try, and the first person to try it was the Lion author, and he selected this 3M flexible diamond abrasive pad, and it has these little, I don't know if you can see them maybe, these little pads on there, and when you look at these pads under the microscope, they are little nickel discs, and they have synthetic diamonds in there. And synthetic diamonds have a little bit of nitrogen in, and they are the world's best electron emitters. And so this emits bursts of electrons, which are effectively producing toroids. They cluster, and you have deuterium soaked these, and so deuterium oxide, rather heavy water, and that gets split by the nickel and by the temperature in the reactor, which is heated up to about 1,000, just over 1,000 degrees centigrade. And in the process of the very slow heating, you create these clusters that then bind onto the iron bolt that is in here at the end here. And this is why, understanding it goes through the Curie temperature, then it releases all of these magnetic pseudomonopole structures at a monochromatic temperature, which means they can cohere more easily, and therefore they form microball lightning, and then that does the magic. And it's heated just resistively using this Cantal A1 wire. And it was kind of like a... Alan Smith came up with this little robot as part of a process of trying to accelerate the research in the field, and it's kind of like a folded glow stick based on Alan Goldwater's work, which was building off Alexander Parkhomow's work. She got diamonds on the soles of her shoes. That's what kills these walking blues. Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any questions, and then I probably should get to sleep because I've got an important meeting in 5 hours' time, 5 and a bit hours' time. Okay. What I will do is I'll try and work through any questions that I find in the live chat tomorrow. Then I will try and answer that on my on remoteview.icu. I you know, if they already think I'm wacky, it doesn't really matter if I start talking about health. I mean, Piantelli hid his health centre from the community. But it is his passion. He was a biological researcher. It was a biological experiment that he discovered the nickel hydrogen system. And you see all of these players talking about nickel hydrogen, but it was a happy accident. It was serendipity that led to the discovery of the nickel hydrogen system, coincidentally in the same year, 1989, as Pons and Fleischmann were made to announce their so-called cold fusion, which is not a name they wanted to give it. But I think it's getting to a point of where you've got to really, really work very hard to deny this kind of level of evidence. This is not a coincidence that this is the Eye of Horus and Eye of Ra, that it is a cross-section of a toroidal structure. It is exactly the same toroidal structure that is the basis for the birdies, which are a vortex soliton, and so you have the vortex through the center. Absolutely everything about this is exactly how this technology works. These are flying about, and I think when they form the balls, they're much more stable, or the tori, which are clusters in the way that I think I've described them. I may be wrong, but whatever. I think we can agree that there is a coherent structure that forms a kind of hollow structure, but it's not actually hollow, and material finds its way into the inside. And I've described how I hypothesize that occurs based on what we physically observe these individual tori doing when they are interacting with matter, and that would account for all of the major observations of John Hutchison, of all of the major observations of the field of Lena, coherent matter transmutation, as I like to call it now, because that's what it is. And I have to thank all of the people profusely for the support, the funds, the intellect, and all of those that went before to make this understanding even remotely possible. Because I even though I had said that these things had bored from the inside to the outside and left the mark on the quartz, I genuinely, even though I didn't have access to be able to look for it, I didn't push for access, because there should have been a hole through which these things came. And I don't know why I didn't force the issue sooner, and I feel ashamed, but I knew I had to look at that other structure that we saw in the end of the last presentation. I knew I had to look at it. That's ontologically what I had to do. That was destiny. I had to do that, and this is why, to find this structure. And it's just it's exactly what I needed to kind of wrap up this aspect of the technology. Okay, so I will thank you, and I will say good night, dobro noc, buenas noches, buenasera. It's been really a pleasure. Thanks for all those people that managed to stick with this extremely long presentation. It's not the longest, but it's fairly lengthy, and I will see you in the next presentation. Have a great week, everybody. Oh, and go and see Top Gun. It's fun.